So we've already seen all of the dungeons that we're gonna get this expansion. So the tier list I have made up, which I can like I can show you guys here. You'll notice that it has a few extra things, just for fun if we have time and we want to talk about it. And it has basically all the dungeons in really no particular order. I can order them if we care. But then it also is going to be ranking the seasons against each other. So just like, where does Season 1 fall, Season 2, Season 3? And at the end, I had Franck add, if we are really feeling weird about it, the actual last couple expansions of Mythic Plus put up against each other now that we've seen how rotating dungeons work. The last, like, it depends on what we're doing in time, because I think you have raid in 2 hours, right? And then JB's old. Yep. He probably has to go to bed. And then Dorki, I think, has practice again at some point. So we might not get there, but it's there in case we want it. Do you guys care where we start? Does anyone feel particularly strong about a certain season or a certain dungeon? Hey guys, real quick, just wanted to thank the sponsor of today's video, Alienware. Alienware has just sent me their brand new Alienware Pro Line mouse. It's been an absolute game changer. It's an ultra lightweight mouse coming in at just 60 grams, and with its rounded PFTE feet, you're ensured that it glides across your mouse pad with ease. As you all know, I'm a very forgetful guy, so the most important thing to me has been its wireless battery life for up to 120 hours. Break through your game with the new Alienware Pro Line peripherals, link in the description. Thank you, Alienware.
Put Algathar at the bottom.
Okay, that's just wrong though, right?
Holy.
Okay, we can fight about this, but
starting off the bat, with the
Algathar, I think, is my favorite. It's like my favorite or top 3 dungeon that I've done this expansion. Why do you hate Algathar?
It's actually just Veximus. I actually just fucking fuck Veximus. He's my least favorite boss of all time.
Wait, why? I thought Veximus was like actually kind of cool to heal, or was it just one of those keys that got super bullshit early in the key scaling?
All right, so I think there's like 2 categories of people on Veximus. There's people that played Preservation Evoker that season, and then there's people that fucking hate that boss.
I almost want to. I feel like this is a super biased healer take. Growler, are you on the same spot? You think Algathar's in D?
No, not at all. No. I think I don't know, man. I'm just surprised. Like, dude, out of every boss, Veximus is
I was thinking like
fight with. Holy moly, yeah. Even I don't even think that's the worst boss in that dungeon.
No, because you could outplay Croth. You could just go fucking line of sight shit. You could do that for 3 fucking days on Veximus before Blizzard was like, no, I mean, it's like, that is, you know, there's the meme about like fun detected, and normally I roll my eyes at that shit, but that boss was so fucking annoying with its mechanics, like how overtuned its mechanics were, and then it was discovered, by me by the way, that you could LOS around pillars and avoid getting the debuff on you. And literally like 2 days later, Blizzard had hotfixed this.
Okay, this is personal then. That's why.
I mean, sort of, but it was one of those things where it was like they hotfixed it really quickly, and I was like, okay, that sucks, but like, all right, I get it. They don't want you to LOS stuff. And then I assumed like, okay, they hotfixed it, and now recognizing that this mechanic, people don't LOS normally tuned mechanics. Okay, like you don't go out of your way because you had to like stop doing DPS to do this shit. DPS don't agree to that kind of shit. Like, oh yeah, I'll go LOS in the middle of my rotation, unless you have to do it to live. And so the fact, like, the first thing Blizzard should have done was like, why are people LOSing this mechanic? Maybe this means this mechanic is broken. Nah, let's just fix it and like not spend any more fucking time thinking about this. And so I was expecting a nerf to the mechanic. It's like, okay, we broke being able to LOS it, but we'll nerf it after that. The nerf never came, and like it felt like such a fucking typical Blizzard reaction.
Man, I feel like they've done that with so many things this season. Like, so many things this season are like, oh, the snap spots in a tall and like all this stuff, like, and they just keep fixing stuff and do not add counterplay to it.
Dratnos, how do you feel about Algathar?
I thought it was pretty good. I don't know if I'd put it in S, because I do think there was some portions of it that weren't great.
Yeah.
But as an overall experience...
Which one specifically? Like the mini-boss before Croth? Like that was kind of like a slow...
Yeah, the Croth fight itself I wasn't a huge fan of as well. Maybe I was just playing Prot Warrior that season, so that bleed was just hurty. I didn't always have a Pres Evoker as well, so sometimes I was just pure despair. And then like some of the trash pulls as well. I don't know, I mean, a lot of them was fun. I think it was fun in the aggregate, right? Like the whole dungeon, it was a key that you were happy to see. At least a key that I was happy to see. It's one of the dungeons where it's like, okay, we're going here, right? It's not... Emotionally, I'd feel good seeing it, but I don't think it's good enough for S tier. I don't know. That just also feels wrong to me. I think it's A.
Dumbass DPS.
There's no way it can be S tier because I mean, the boss fights in general were really, really weak. I thought the tree boss was cool.
I think
thought
the
that
tree
was,
boss is like one of the best
better
dungeon bosses
they've
ever.
made.
I think the tree
Yeah,
boss is
Croth-
awesome.
Croth was just way too one-shotty and like way too out of control. Veximus, I'm not saying it was a great boss. Like it's like an average boss. Also, the last boss was really bad. The
That
last
was one of those
boss
bosses
was
that scaled really badly. Like when you got high keys, it was just like, can this fucking guy be done?
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, like people would literally pull entire like multiple trash pulls on top of that guy just because he did nothing. Like you would pull 3 packs of mobs onto that guy. That would be a normal pull that you would do in a high key because it was literally just like fighting 3 packs with lust, except for the boss is just sitting there too. And then randomly the boss would like do this thing where he would like queue up his spells and just one-shot people. You know what I mean? Like he would like put the dot on you and he would shoot a bolt at you and you would just die or something. I don't remember exactly what that guy did, but I remember that boss was like one of the worst bosses. But yeah, I think I like the trash layout of the dungeon. I think besides the mini boss, I think the trash was cool. I think it was a little like I don't the one area by Veximus was a little kick heavy, but overall I think it was like fun that you could choose your buff and like get a certain thing.
Yeah, that's what I loved
was,
about
like,
it.
I think they definitely catered to like, okay, let's just keep the like what stuff makes M plus fun, like just doing big damage. Like, okay, let's just put an area with 1,000,000 flowers so you have big overall, and then let's give you a stat buff.
Dumbass
and it's like
yeah.
we are simple people. We are simple people. We are doing dungeons. We want to AoE. We appreciate that, and I think that makes
That moves it up a
Yeah.
like dumbass DPS PUV. AoEing in that room was awesome, and also I particularly am a huge sucker for dungeons where you can go different directions, and there's a reason why you would go in each direction based on. I love that, and I don't think they do that enough.
It was sick as well because even in like MDI or it was MDI or TGP that season, people would go different. Like it was unsolved.
Correct. Yeah.
Whether you go left
And
or right.
I think that's awesome. Like if they could do that in like every other dungeon, I would love that.
Also, shout out to being able to mount up in a dungeon. That always makes a good dungeon, in my opinion.
Ooh, good point. Good point. Actually,
Good
I totally forgot
comms,
about
yeah.
that.
All right, I threw up a vote in chat because this one was so like across the board. They landed pretty solidly on A. You guys are all saying it can't be S. JB wants it to be in D. So we gotta figure out exactly where that goes.
It's gonna go in A. It's
Put it
not
in
gonna
A,
be
man. Don't listen to the old man.
I would probably say B if I had to.
I can understand why it would be. Like, I think you have to keep in mind that me and JB are healers, so like our point counts for like maybe a quarter of a vote each.
Also, our entire votes are going to be skewed toward. A lot of everyone in here does a bit of High Mythic Plus, and High Mythic Plus has this really weird problem where a dungeon can be fucking amazing on a 20, but it just happens to have this one ability that, like, you know, with the way damage is scaled in keys, where it just becomes bullshit super early, and if you do a ton of high keys, it's like the bane of your existence, and that single thing could like draw down a bunch of tiers, and then that's something that people listening to this would have never experienced, right? So like there's like a bunch of weird shit like that too.
Also, let's keep in mind, I think Algathar Academy is like single-handedly responsible for the death of Explosive. I think they removed that mechanic simply because of that dungeon.
It was your stream, I think, where I saw the clip of you had the like explosive feet. Like it was at the bottom of instead of the top.
Oh yeah,
was
you
where
were trying the nameplates at feet.
Yeah,
thing,
you had you had so much tech for it. It was really cool.
Or no could too, yeah. Okay, I'm just gonna pick one randomly. Neltherus.
Hold on. I think we should do this by season because
Sure.
Yeah, I like
Given-
doing it by season too.
given
Yeah.
the way that AUG has affected season 2 on, I
AUG?
think season 1 should like stand alone in terms of its. It would be hard to compare season 1 and season 2 because season 2 was so dramatically different with the insertion of Ogboker.
Court of Stars. This is actually.
All right, I'm gonna get my opinion out because people might disagree with me, but I think Quarter Stars is I think Quarter Stars is terrible.
Oh, I do
Like,
too.
first of all the trash in the beginning. There's like so many frontals. The visibility is terrible. It's like purple on purple on purple. There's trees that get in your way if you're playing normally zoomed out camera. There's so much like random RP. There's the RP at the end where you guess the guy, except for you have a demon hunter, so you don't guess the guy, or you have a paladin. I think the boss fights were cool. That was the only redeeming part of Quarter Stars is I enjoyed all the bosses. They were like all very different and like different ways to heal and like I also think the randomness of the like which bonuses you get. I mean, it's not great for high keys because it's annoying when you don't get the good ones. And I feel like in low keys like you just like don't really care or notice them. So Also, no one ever like did those dungeons right anyway, so I don't know. I really just like that dungeon.
I had a really weird experience where leaving Legion, I thought Court of Stars was one of the best dungeons they ever made. And then when it came back in Season 1, I was really excited for it, and I never enjoyed doing that key. It was one of those ones that was super easy, so you did higher keys of it. It was like tuned low for the rest of the season, so maybe that's part of it. But I think I really liked... What's that little city that Court of Stars is in? What's it called? It's like... Suramar, yeah, like Suramar and the Nightborn, and that whole thing was super sick, and I think I associated a lot of that with Court of Stars, and maybe it's like, this was in Legion, right? So like maybe what we thought was a good dungeon in Legion was just, like, dungeons have just maybe gotten better, so it, it like didn't stack up. But yeah, I thoroughly didn't enjoy it in Season 1. I was like, are all my opinions I've ever given wrong because I thought Court of Stars was great and it wasn't. So I would definitely not put it above B, like, at the most.
They no-healed this dungeon.
Yeah. Yep.
This was the genesis of that shit.
What do you think, Dratnos?
So there were parts of this dungeon I liked, but I agree it really did not age as well as I was hoping it did from Legion. I think the decision to keep the profession buffs in was pretty bad. I think that is just not something we need or that improves dungeons.
Yeah.
And I think that, okay, so I liked healing the later bosses. I did some healing that season, and that was really fun in a medium to high key, trying to heal the last two bosses early on. Those were sweet. But it really, like, that was all of the difficulty of that dungeon, and then you just had the rest of the dungeon of just getting to that point and trying not to make a stupid mistake. And I think that really highlights, like, if there's a dungeon where there's one hard part, then you just kind of have a dungeon with a bunch of easy parts because of the way that the scaling works. And I don't know. Yeah, I think this was a disappointment dungeon, and the fact that it was easier than the rest of the season except for Shadow Moon made it so you did this dungeon a lot, and it was one where I was kind of like, ugh, this again, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting change from the Legion context of Court of Stars to where we are now. Is back in Legion you couldn't re-roll your keys. You were just stuck with whatever you got out of the, when you got it at the end of the dungeon. And I feel like that has changed the way people feel about easy keys. If the dungeon itself isn't super fun. Because in Legion, if you got an easy key, you were like, oh, thank Jesus. Like, this could have turned into Seat or, fucking Upper Kara or some shit that's, like, can be legitimately difficult to time. And thank Jesus it's Court of Stars and we can actually, like, time this and do something else. But in Dragonflight, when you can reroll your key, you end up running those dungeons
so
over
much
and
more.
over and over and over. And you're like, Jesus fucking Christ, just get me out of this dungeon. I don't even care that we're timing it. I just want to die.
That's a good point.
The Shadow Moon effect.
Well, I have someone at the door. My thing with Court is, while I do like before the second boss that you have to, like, it's always different and you have to, like, change how you pull the trash based on where the enforcers are. I like that element of it, but I feel like they missed a lot of opportunity to make the second boss, the second to last boss, really cool. You should have the option to, like, kind of, how, like, Awakened you could leave a few things for the last boss, like, based on the scenario. Like, I think you should have that option. Like, the boss should be killable and it actually makes sense with, like, 1 or 2 extra things. And the difficulty was reasonable, but there was, like, a reason to make that decision. But it was, outside of, like, some MDI kiting bullshit, it was like you kill all of them and then you just do the singular boss. And I don't know if that boss wasn't bad either on its own. It's just like, I wish there was a way to make it cooler. Maybe it's a little bit too specific of criticism.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, where's it go?
I will say it's not like, I think, like, probably C is fair. It's not like it has some redeeming qualities. Like, there are way worse dungeons, but it was a pretty big disappointment.
I would probably put it B.
Yeah, I think C or B makes sense. If we're counting its Legion incarnation, I do think it should go up a bit. But if it's just the Dragonflight, I guess I'd probably be fine with C.
Okay, C it is. C for Court. Ruby Life Pools.
Wait, hold on. By the way, everybody's going to see the beginning of this video and think that we're doing the meme where you rank the fucking dungeons by the first letter of the...
Well, we can't do that with Ruby, so we're going to break that very quickly. So I, like, when I did this in beta, this was, like, a super, super fun dungeon for me because, like, it's, like, super... The idea was it's super short. There's a small amount of bosses. The bosses all seemed like they had, like, cool ideas for them, like, really good boss design. But then, upon doing it, I think this is going to be weird for you guys, too, because at a higher key, this was, like, really hard, right? Is that, like, Ruby Life Pools was a very difficult key at a certain key level?
Oh, yeah.
So maybe that will matter. So that I didn't do high keys in that season, so that doesn't mean anything to me. But I felt like there was one too many fire elementals when you go in a circle before you can do the second boss. It just felt repetitive. But I really like the boss design, and I like the trash at the beginning. That's my only take. And while you guys are giving yours, I gotta go check my door real quick.
Healer take. I think this dungeon was very, very, very fun to heal. I think this was like one of the most, in terms of like encounters to heal and like feeling useful and like doing stuff on a healer, which a lot of people don't really care about that much. I think I really liked, for being a linear dungeon, I think it was perfect in terms of trash layout. Like, you have a little bit of choices what to pull. You can choose to pull big or small because there's like, you know, everything in the area. And also, it was a short dungeon. Like, I think the linear dungeons that are really long tend to get boring, but if it's like a 3-boss 30-minute banger, I think it's good. I don't like the fact that you had to kill all the fire ellies, and it felt like going around in the circle was kind of boring. Also, the difficulty of this dungeon varied wildly. If I remember correctly, it released very, very difficult, and then they slowly kept nerfing everything over and over again throughout the entire season. I remember the bolts got nerfed like 3 different times, the last boss. So it's hard to know like exactly what iteration of it, but I enjoyed this dungeon a lot.
It was definitely a dungeon that, as a healer, you like no pull was a break pull. Like all the bosses were difficult to heal. All the trash had like unavoidable damage. You were like, it was one of the few dungeons this expansion where I would be using healing cooldowns like on CD. And you would have to like pace the group to be like, whoa, hold on, like my shit's not back yet. We can't do that pull yet. And most of the time, that's just not a problem
Isn't that
at
good?
all. Yeah, and that's the thing is if you were looking for a dungeon, you know, I think from a healer perspective, you have a lot of guys that are like, I don't want to do damage, I just want to heal. This is the like platonic ideal of a dungeon where you spend like no time DPSing, all time healing. Every pull you just have to be blasting on healing. And so if that's the kind of dungeon that you enjoy as a healer, and I think any healer that enjoys healing enjoys that kind of experience, this was like your perfect dungeon. The problem was it was so fucking cranked up when it was released that it was just frustrating, because even if you were trying to heal the entire time, it was still easy to wipe in there. And the last boss especially, you know, like the second boss had the insane fucking bleed that it put on the tank, which was really annoying to try to heal through, because it felt like you couldn't really heal through it. It would just shit on your tank. The last boss, like having the debuffs come out, and they were just so fucking overtuned, and it was incredibly difficult to heal through them. As that got nerfed, the dungeon felt more fairer, and that was better. And then it, I think, legitimately became like a really fun dungeon to just try to heal. But it was definitely overtuned.
Dorki has joined the call as well. He's
Yo, what the fuck is this Algafar Academy in A tier?
Wait, where would
Is
you
that
put
high or
it?
low?
I think I'll put it in S.
Oh, I wanted to put it
relative to these dungeons.
I wanted to put it in S as well, but it got taken down a little bit.
You got healer to
well,
take.
not even healer. The chat the chat
No,
very
here comes
aggressively
Dorki,
put it
dude.
in A. So like I backed
All right, what
down.
are they putting in S? Huh? The Court of Stars, Shadowwood Burial Ground, all the easy dungeons.
No, they well, I didn't give them a chance to vote on court, but they were
Okay,
voting
yeah,
it
yeah.
very highly in chat. But I did not give them the ability to influence us like that. All right,
Okay.
we're talking about Ruby right now, and it looks like I think this is about to go decently high. Sounds like it.
I would put it A
I
tier.
think-
Well,
I like
if you
Ruby.
measure at the end of the season, I would probably put it A tier.
Yeah, I mean, they did react reasonably quickly. It was like a month in that they did a pretty big set of nerfs to this dungeon, which I think was good. It's kind of a shame we haven't seen that some dungeons maybe this season.
Bro, they're working on the War Within already.
Yeah.
I think Ruby is one of the best linear dungeons. Like, there's not a lot of options. At least it's well designed. I think, you know, like, most of the encounters are good. They have the best boss fights of the Dragonflight dungeons.
Yeah.
And there are options how you play the dungeon. Like, okay, you can do the first area in, like, this way, or you can pull less in this first area, or, like, people start pulling more in the first area afterwards. And then, you know, like, the way you path upstairs. So it's one of the better linears, in my opinion.
Dratnos, what do you think?
I'm okay with A, yeah.
I like A.
I like A. It can't be S if Algathar is not S.
Yeah, it definitely can't be S.
Right, right.
Which
Like
is
that-
weird,
I
because
just-
like
I think
Algathar
Algathar
that's what I'm
definitely
weird.
better.
Algathar
Yeah.
being an A means that like almost nothing here can be S except for like.
I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm not gonna put any fucking dungeon S tier from someone.
But you have to.
You don't have to.
So
you don't have to.
You have to.
No,
Well, you don't. I mean,
to.
it is very possible you could do it because it is relative, but like it's possible you could do a dungeon season where there's no true S tier
All right,
dungeons.
let's just drop them all down one more then.
Wait, what?
Get that right. Just go next.
Okay, Halls of Valor. I fucking love Halls of Valor.
Yeah, dude,
I put an A.
I think this is the best like modernizing of a dungeon they've done as well. I think it turned into a really good like final product.
Like I should hate Halls. Like it has like a million frontals as a melee that should be annoying. It's super long. There's RP. They nerfed it, but there's like still RP. But I fucking loved doing this dungeon. I don't know.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I think I like that they simplified the beginning area so that you can pull bigger. They fixed some of the. Again, this is one where the bosses were really tough at the start. My biggest complaint about this, why I can't put it in S tier, is I think the end area is really bad. I think the 4 mini bosses is like I think honestly this dungeon would be S tier if it just ended after you do the 2 wings. Like you just go one way, you do the other wing, it's 3 bosses, and then it just ends. But the whole end area is like the Skovald plus the 4 plus the Odin is like
The 4
all those
are
bosses
super
are not
boring.
fun.
Like,
Yeah,
and there's
it's
like
just,
it was until like the MDI at the end of the season until someone found some cool shit where they like dragged all the bears upstairs, you know, and then it was like, okay, then it actually feels normal instead of like you go doing this like 10 minutes of RP and bosses, you know. Okay, it sounds like it's an easy A. No counterpoint. Some of these need to go a little faster if we're gonna do this in time anyway. Temple.
F.
Ooh.
Okay, so in Temple's
That's a
defense,
little bit too brutal.
when they brought it back, I was super scared of what Wise Mari was going to be. Because, like, if you guys remember the old Wise Mari version, I mean, if that was put in Mythic Plus, it would have just been the biggest dog shit of all time. And they made that boss, like, pretty good. And the second boss was, like, whatever. And I actually liked the last boss a little bit, but the third boss was super cringe for... I don't know if it was just a pug thing, but, like, it just seemed like the tank damage, and maybe you could argue the group damage, was just clearly way too overtuned, and they just never fixed it, and that was a huge stain on the dungeon, I think.
It was a brutal dungeon.
I think the problem was more so the difference between the way some classes could handle it and others. Because the way it worked, right, it didn't put like a giant healing absorb on you. So like if you were a class that could deal with that, or if you're a warrior that could like spell reflect it, like certain things were omega easy, and then like certain tank healer combinations were like nearly impossible to do that boss on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean Jade, I think it's not. I think there's enough like okay stuff to. I mean, it's pretty bad.
I'd say it's D, man. This is the key. This is the key where there's 7 keys where you're gonna keep playing, and there's an 8th that it could roll into. That's Jade Serpent, and you're done for the day. I don't know.
The problem, the biggest issue with Temple is it pissed your tank off, and that's
Yeah, so
kind
I
of a
was the
dungeon.
tank. Yep.
When you have a dungeon that tilts your tank, you avoid
That's
that
true.
shit at all costs. Because when your tank starts getting
Then
mad,
the
then you're
group's
like,
done.
oh fuck, the group's gonna break up. Okay, you know what? Yeah, we can re-roll the temple. It's fine. I don't need. Yeah, I could get a little IO from it, but it's fine. We could go back to Shadow Moon. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do another quarter.
I mean, I think one saving grace for this dungeon is that it's high intensity. So I would not put it below D personally, because I think there are some major
stinkers.
down there
Like, yeah, if we're
dungeons.
gonna put this in D, or I just added an F tier if we want it.
Yeah,
like,
because the next one belongs in F.
yeah. So D, we're thinking D.
I'm fine with D.
Personally, I thought it was like a C or a B, but I can understand why tanks didn't like it. It was funny when they died, but I had
was
to
not
laugh
funny.
with my mic muted.
Yeah.
Okay, so Shadow Moon Burial Grounds. This is
This one is the worst.
super
dungeon
dog
they've
shit.
F,
Yeah,
F.
super
this
dog
entire
shit.
expansion. Easily
This
the
bricks-
worst dungeon.
the
My
thing is,
God,
it
it
was
was so bad.
Because it was so easy, it bricked the entire season because you ran this dungeon, like 60% of keys you ran were Shadow and Burial Grounds because you had to re-roll into it and you could never re-roll off of it. And so, like, it was not a particularly fun dungeon. There were some bits that could still get you, but realistically, it was just a tax. You would just show up and your key level would go up, and then you would get a key that was kind of higher than you were supposed to have, and then you would go do that key because you'd earned it from a Shadow and Burial Grounds, and then if you were lucky, you would do well in it pretty early. Otherwise, you would go back to Shadow and Burial Grounds and farm up that key again to get more attempts at it at the key level that's score for you.
And there's nothing exciting about this dungeon.
Yeah.
Too. Like it's
And-
literally
Actually,
just like some boring ass one pack at a time, and they're all dog shit packs, and there's nothing like.
I feel like Shadow
challenging.
Moon is probably unfairly maligned as a result of the key reroll meta, and I don't think it's really that bad of a dungeon. It's just
I
that
think Bro, it
has Bone Maw.
circumstances.
Bro, Bone Maw,
Yeah.
Bone Maw might be the worst Mythic Plus dungeon ever. It just you just
Bone
sit
Maw
there,
is
you
so
sit there for
fucking miserable.
like 6 minutes just fighting this awful fight.
Like it was
And
definitely
it's so
undertuned.
fucking long too.
I thought the first boss was like a decent boss.
Yep, I'll give you that.
Second boss was
Yeah.
kind of boring, but sometimes it's nice to have a boss you just beat the shit out of and turn your brain off. Last boss was, I don't know, you could
I think
throw
that
on
was
it.
also fine. Yeah.
Like it was a decently challenging boss. Like if you got to the last boss, you didn't feel like it was free. Bone Maw was definitely a buzzkill, and the dungeon was definitely too easy. But I feel like if I hadn't just run it infinity times, I wouldn't remember it as being that bad of a dungeon. I just ran it way too many fucking
It's so
times.
funny seeing your take versus like some people's in chat that I've been like picking out, and that is as like a high key pusher, you're doing stuff all the time. You end up hating the dungeons because of the reroll meta that you have to keep doing. Yet there are people in chat who hate dungeons and all they want to do is get their gear real quick. So they fucking love Shadow Moon because it's the only dungeon they did, and it was super free to get their 20s done or whatever, right? So it's like, but at the same time, like someone who purposefully doesn't interact with content is probably not the best person to to like give takes on how good or bad dungeons were. But for a civilian dungeon, it sounds like it was pretty well liked, but we're not going to look at it from that angle.
We're not gonna go from that angle.
Dungeon sucks.
Bad dungeon. Cool. All right. This is, so I think no code is interesting. I think a lot of people, like, I know if I were to ask my Twitch chat about no code offensive, it would also go in like a really, really low tier. I don't know.
Let fly.
I feel like the bosses were pretty good. Second boss is like a fucking awesome dungeon boss, right? Third boss is whatever. Last boss is kind of whatever. First boss pretty cool, easy but cool. And
It
then
was whatever.
it's just
So-
I don't know, what do you think?
My problem with this dungeon was that it had this big promise of being like a nice wide open place. You're like flying around, and that kind of implies a degree of choice to what you can do. And then every single boss has 4 packs that you have to kill those exact 4 packs to spawn that boss.
Yeah.
And then there was this trash in the last area of the dungeon that you just never pulled.
Completely ignored.
Completely ignored, and it was like it wasn't particularly realistic to pull it either. So I dock points for that, but I agree that it was not that bad in terms of like the actual experience of fighting the different parts of the dungeon. Like it had one of, I think, and the healers can give their takes on this, but I think the storm boss was one of the like healer bosses that they've made.
Yep.
And you know
Very
that
good
kind of
boss.
separated the good healers from the bad healers.
There's a
and-
good DPS boss too. That was just a good boss.
Yeah.
That was just a straight
Yeah, it was
up
a
good
great boss. Shout out to whoever made that boss.
Huge shout out. Apparently, it was one of his first bosses too.
Yeah, that one owned. Tira and Maruk I wasn't a huge fan of, but I think the rest of the dungeon, I don't know, it was, I would say, fine to pretty good, and it was a dungeon that the only real shame was that like there was this promise, like looking at the MDT, of different stuff you could pull, and then in practice you just couldn't actually really do all that much different.
How do you guys feel about the dragon riding part of the dungeon? Because I often hear people being like, "Oh, it just didn't work." Like when Tindril was coming out, they're like, "Remember no could," and it's like, I feel like dragon riding had nothing to do why no could was bad. It was what
Yeah,
it was what
didn't really add
yeah it
anything
was
to
what
it.
you said. It's like, oh well, you had to go do these 4 packs, but it had nothing to do with dragon riding. They were like killing a pack and then instantly fucking flying to the next one. At least I'm like, not every dungeon should be like that, but I don't think that experience specifically was bad. I feel like the dragon riding element was, who
Yeah.
the fuck keeps showing up to my door? All right.
Okay, but counterpoint, when I tried to fly to the last boss and it fucking ejected me back to the start of that area, that shit never stopped tilting me.
And the fact that you still did fly to the last boss, you just had to
You
like
just
fly
went
to a
through a different
specific
way.
pixel on a on the southern, the
Yep.
southern slope of the mountain. That was super dumb. Yeah.
Are you guys excited for when they bring this back in season 4 and then you can't do that and you have to fight your way through the end?
Not particularly.
Oh, apparently they did that for Azure Vault. You can't jump down
Yeah.
Azure Vault
Oh.
anymore.
Oh no.
Yeah, I don't know. No good, I think, I agree with you, is annoying that there's mandatory packs. I think the pull size of that dungeon was cool. You could pull big, but the packs were a little mechanically dense. I feel like we take like a month off of Dorki's life every time we do that key, like in the lightning area, when you just have to like constantly call 2 kicks on 2 different mobs. That
Well, it was
melee
fine
kicks
when I
can't
was playing
cover.
Holy Pal or Prop Paladin, but
Oh yeah.
But before, like when I was
yeah.
when I was like trying to do keys on like Blood DK and Bear and Brewmaster, can't believe. Holy hell, that place was just. It was the fucking worst, man. Why are there just like 2 mobs that chain cast, and anytime a cast goes off, it instantly kills a person in your party?
Dude, one thing before I got up, you guys, I heard someone was mentioning the boss or whatever zapping you back to the front. That was terrible. That was so bad. Like that, it deserves something. Fuck, I don't. Where are we going here? This is.
I think B is fair. I think there are good parts, there are bad parts. Like I think this is like, well, after tuning, I'm sort of doing all the dungeons after tuning. I think it's like a pretty middle of the road dungeon. I think again, this is another one of those dungeons where if they just cut off the end part with the end boss, like none of that stuff was good, and you just fly to the 3 areas and do the 3 and then those 3 bosses, like I think the dungeon actually would have been just so much better.
I will say one thing about Noku that stands out from other dungeons that season is I felt like it was more affected by shitty affixes than any other dungeon in that pool. It felt like Sanguine made that dungeon
Bolstering was
just
horrible.
like you skip. Yeah, bolstering was so fucking bad in there. Like any of the affixes where like killing something made something else happen, it just felt so shitty in that dungeon.
Thundering as well.
True.
I don't know if this is objective or subjective, but I feel like that dungeon had the worst thundering stuns.
Oh yeah, and somebody in chat said you quaking on the last boss when you get like gripped in, like right as a fucking quaking is about to, like, holy shit.
Yeah,
that
dude.
dungeon is so tilting.
Also, imagine how much worse the last boss would be if there wasn't that rock. You know, the young rock.
Yeah.
That rock was a beast. All right, Azure Vault, last one of season 1.
Okay, if there's anything that has to be S tier, I feel like this has to be one of them.
I still wouldn't put this as S tier, but in hindsight, it was definitely not my favorite dungeon to start the season, but it ended up, I think, maybe being my favorite dungeon of that
Yeah,
pool.
this was a fun dungeon.
I'm gonna commit crimes if this is an S and Algothar isn't.
I think that this is A as well, yeah.
I just don't like the amount of... This is one of those dungeons that just pissed me off because of the amount of running you had to do. You couldn't mount up, and then it just felt like no matter how you did the dungeon, you were going to be fucking hoofing it the entire time, and it was... I just spent too much time running.
Yeah, this dungeon got really good. For people who are confused, saying this dungeon was terrible, this is another dungeon that got changed dramatically throughout the season. And if you were doing this at the end of the season, it was totally different from the beginning. They did like sweeping nerfs to like make so many more mobs playable. Also, people learned routes on how to like jump from one area to the other. So there was like tons of people would do stuff where you would like do the last boss and then go back and then do more pulls and stuff. Like there was, I think there's a lot of cool stuff about this dungeon once people got good at it.
Dude, they retroactively,
I think it's a good one.
They added 90 seconds to the timer, and it retroactively gave you score if you had a deplete that was less than 90 seconds over. That was big for me. I had like a 10-second over key that became in time.
Also, the pulls were fun. There were a lot of like big pulls you could do, and then like they weren't overly complicated. All you had to do was just like stop the frontal or not let the flower cast go off, and then.
Now,
you could do big pulls that were scary but doable, and you were like adding mobs added some difficulty, but not like nuclear difficulty to it.
I also think it was not intended to be this way, which is kind of interesting, or at least I think so. But how variable the dungeon ended up being was really cool. Like you mentioned that earlier, where you could do the skip where you jump down. You could go all the way down, but like skip a lot of this stuff and then kill the last boss and port back and then do those big like those AoE pulls like in the MDI where they like pulled both sides at once and got them all together. Like it was weirdly, even though it's a linear dungeon, it was non-linear in a lot of ways, and I thought that was just really, really solid alongside the big
They had
pulls.
that system at the start where you could to skip to a certain part of the dungeon, and I think every fucking dungeon should have some.
Yeah,
like Awakened.
God, those pulls at the beginning were so good too. I'm actually just thinking about doing a Jerval. You don't dislike any part of that dungeon. Like every single like area of that dungeon is good. Maybe it is S tier.
Well, one thing I will say is that I think it's a little biased in terms of a higher end group. That's a dungeon that again took a lot of coordination. So you're talking about the early area. I'm pretty sure a lot of people's experiences of the early area was either you pull one pack at a time, or like if you try and do anything else, the lashers just kill you. Because you don't like, you need to like every single one of those mobs in that beginning area was a caster. Then you have the guys with that rock frontal that would do that bleed that would stack on the tank. and you would need to like always point them away, and there'd be like ground stuffs, and like in a high end key you would just stun the ground effects over and over so the tank wouldn't have to move. But like there's so much stuff that can go wrong if you're
Oh, that's such a good idea. I never think of that. It's like a Taldazar, right? Like when you go into a Taldazar, you know that you're just gonna go left when it starts. And you look forward to that because you like it. But if you ever go into a pug, they go right every single time because those like 2 mobs with kicks is enough for them to completely avoid that side. And the beginning of that dungeon just has flowers casting, stacking AoE damage that's gonna kill you. Yeah, I see that. Okay.
Also, this dungeon gave you a speed buff when you release, and that's also insanely based.
Dude, that was something we suggested. But I mean, like I gave heavy feedback about the running.
We complained about
this.
That. Let's take actually ownership. We made this dungeon good. This dungeon was in beta. It was crap. We slammed so much feedback about this, and it got better. So we did this.
It's true.
We did this.
I think you're saying with no crit used to be so much worse. You guys remember no crit during PTR? Holy hell.
Okay, Algathar or
crazy.
Azure Vault for the #1 dungeon in A tier, in your all's opinions. Doesn't have to be a long thought. Just
I don't know.
As a healer, I like Azure Vault, but I think a lot of DPS players will say AA. And AA was more pug friendly. So overall, I think probably AA.
AA.
But as a healer in an organized group, I had AV fun. I thought AV was fun.
All right, cool. Moving on to S2. Let me see. I think I'm missing one, maybe. Oh yeah, Neltharus. And I think the rest of it I have.
Quick point out. Look at the Dragonflight dungeons. 3 of them in A tier, and then B tier for the 4 Dragonflight dungeons.
For the actual Dragonflight.
The Dragonflight ones. Yeah,
bangers,
I think they did. Yeah, bangers.
But you also have to realize like these are the dungeons that farm the pugs. Like a lot of pugs and a lot of like civilians do not enjoy Algathar, Azure Vaults, or Ruby Life pools.
Okay. Let's actually start with the 4 Dragonflight dungeons. I think in each season in this season. Where is that? Where's the last one? Neltharus back. Where's the one I'm missing? Neltharus, Brackenhide Hollow, Oldemon, and there's one more, right?
Halls of Infusion.
Okay, cool. All right, let's start with Neltharus.
Sucks ass.
I think Neltharus is as bad as Shadowmoon Battlegrounds. I think this dungeon's horrible. You can't make a dungeon where
no, I think it's like Temple of Jade Serpent level. I think there's enough redeeming things like Shadowmoon. Literally everything in that dungeon is terrible. Neltharus, like I think the boss fights are okay.
Yeah,
I think the chains is an okay idea. It was just like overdone. Like I think there were like quite a few big pulls. You can choose to go right or left, and you can choose to like. I like the way the trash was laid out in that dungeon in the sense that, again, it was linear, but there was like lots of packs here and there on the side that you could very easily skip if you wanted to, but you could also very easily pull them, as opposed to like needing to use Shroud or skips in order to, change your percent. So I think there were like some redeeming qualities, but overall, like, yeah.
How did they allow the chains to be a thing that long? Like that should have been fucking changed instantly. Like, there's a lot. This was actually my favorite season 2 dungeon coming out of PTR before people started hyper optimizing the chains. If you were doing a dungeon where 60+% of the trash count is killed by the environment, that dungeon fucking sucks. That's bad. That's just you cannot argue it's bad. It's so bad. I don't know. I hate that.
That is I think a consequence of the change they made on PTR where they locked the dungeons for like half the week. I think if teams had more time to sit on PTR and abuse the shit out of those chains, it would have been obvious sooner how disgustingly broken those things scaled. And I think that's one of the drawbacks to limiting how much time groups can spend on PTR is you need the rats that just sit on PTR and just spam keys all day to find that kind of interaction in a dungeon of like, hey, these work on like mobs even if they're not in the area. If you just stack the mobs in the area near the other mobs, what if we pulled fucking half the dungeon onto one of the guys?
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I don't like Neltharus, but I just feel like it can't be in
Shadowmoon tier.
Shadowmoon.
I think D is fair.
Okay,
I think
sure.
D, yeah.
All right, Brackenhide. This one turned into this was the one at the beginning of the expansion, like not the beginning of season 2, the beginning of the expansion, when we did it on Mythic 0. The take from everyone was like, this is going to be the worst Mythic Plus dungeon of all time.
Yeah,
and then
fucking hated this dungeon.
And then Blizzard's response was, well, we haven't like really focused on it yet because it's not going to be a Mythic Plus dungeon for 6 months. And then they actually ended up being right. Right? They like made it 100 times better. I mean, this was one of the better dungeons of the season, right?
To be fair, if you tried to go left in that dungeon, it
Oh,
was
yeah,
still
true.
a dog shit fucking dungeon. So part of it was just that teams started figuring out the correct way to path through Brackenhide after it started getting nerfed. I do think it definitely had the biggest glow up I've ever seen of any dungeon. And it ended up being, I mean, again, it's tough. Like, if you played any healer besides Holy Paladin, that dungeon sucked ass because you needed Holy Paladin to go stand in melee to absorb the random, like, physical damage in melee, or else your melee DPS
Oh yeah,
were
that
trying
was
to eat
unplayable
that,
for
and
melee.
they got
Yeah.
fucking shit on. So it was very much like if you brought a meta comp into this dungeon, it was like fun, but if you didn't, it fucking sucked. If you tried to go the wrong direction, it fucking sucked. If you didn't have like the right fucking trinkets for the last boss, it fucking sucked. And like, I don't know, I would probably put it in like B or C tier. And it had, I think, a last boss that I really didn't like because of the scaling issues that have become apparent this expansion, where if you have a boss that has adds that have their own independent health pool that also scale with the key, then that boss starts taking like exponentially longer as the key goes along, and that's not fun. And that boss was a prime example of that. But I think once teams got it figured out, and if you played the correct comp, it was fun. And in that version of it, I maybe put it like A tier. But I could also see, just depending on that, like when you go in there with which classes or which direction you go, it could easily be like a C or a D tier dungeon in my mind.
Something
Yeah, I think pulls were fun. You do lots of big pulls. They made so many improvements to all the the beginning area and the other stuff. I would say the huge negatives to me were the last boss was the hardest part, and the walk back from to the last boss was absolutely miserable. I don't know why they still have runbacks like that. On top of that, part of the reason that the run back was bad was because they did the thing where they put mini bosses in the dungeon that no one wants to fight and that are really annoying, and then they get mad that no one's fighting them and they give them True Sight. So there was those guys on the bridge that had True Sight or whatever that no one ever wants to fight. I don't know why they do that, but there there was, I think, other fun stuff. I sort of agree with JB that if you're playing Paladin and you're OP and you're blasting all your CDs, it felt fun because you could keep up with it, but it was probably frustrating if you weren't Holy Paladin. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this one to me is like a mixed bag. It's like kind of middle of the road.
Yeah, I think it loses a lot of... Okay, the idea of, oh, you couldn't even go a certain direction because the mobs were so crazy. That's certainly bad, but like that's happened in a lot of good dungeons in the past. Like, do you guys know in Eye of Ashara, when you kill the first boss, you can go right, and there's like a tunnel with fucking ogres in it?
Yeah.
Like I mean, like there have been really good dungeons in the past that were non-linear-ish, and that's what this dungeon is supposed to be, right? You can pick your second boss, but you just avoided that, and what you actually chose to do was fun. So how much does it matter? Like, you certainly lose points that you don't have the option to do both, but if one of the sides is really good, how much does that matter? I don't know. I don't know how much point. That's my question. I don't know how much points. I think Brackenhide is a great dungeon, except they never tuned some of the mobs to where you could not possibly do it, and that seems really bad. And I feel like it loses a point for that. So what were you saying, B tier?
I'd probably put a B tier.
I think below no good for me. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think above no good personally.
Okay.
I would say above no good, I think.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a decent bit, but also like I'm kind of biased since I played God Comp that entire season, and it was pretty fun in TGP. But last boss by far ruins it for me. Like, yeah, I think last boss, like if it wasn't for the last boss, this would be an S tier dungeon for me. Like if they literally just,
last
like,
boss was horrible.
You scrap everything from the tree boss onwards, and this would be perfect dungeon for me.
That's going to be a theme for another Season 2 dungeon that we're going to talk about in a bit. But basically, any dungeon boss that spawns adds you have to kill is just a massive problem for high-scaling Tyrannical. It's same...
or shields, too.
Yeah, or shields.
I yelled at them so much about that in the beta, too. I brought it up over and over and over. And I would just submit the same feedback every time because I knew they were going to, like, make that mistake. Like, anytime there's a shield or an add on the boss, it needs to have some sort of like repercussion of like, okay, now you get this, like at least like on, like, oh, maybe it gets stunned, or maybe you do extra damage or whatever, like a Vuln phase.
Uldaman, Legacy of Tyr.
Ooh, I personally enjoyed this dungeon a lot, but I fully understand if people dislike this dungeon.
This dungeon was hard.
I thought that
It was difficult, and it was long as well. It felt like you would reach this like corridor and you'd be like, okay, this is the last corridor of the dungeon, and it was like, actually, no, this is the corridor to boss like 4 out of 5.
Yeah, definitely
was
one
a
of the long
dungeon-
dungeons that really felt long. You felt it every time you were in there.
This was another dungeon where if you played it with the correct comp, it felt entirely different.
Yeah.
And if you tried to do Sentinel with no bleed dispel, you would just get fucking farmed. Like it was disgusting how that fight was tuned. But then if you played with God comp with a bunch of dwarves in it, then it was like, I don't even understand what's so fucking bad about this fight. One guy takes the bleed dispel, or one guy takes a bleed for like 10 seconds in this fight, and then I don't see it again for 2 minutes. I do think that, well, first off, you couldn't mount up in this dungeon. It was a very linear dungeon. You couldn't mount up. There's not even like really room. I feel like if you're gonna make a linear dungeon, there at least needs to be room to like move around packs you don't want to pull, and there was no room in this dungeon. It was all narrow corridors. I didn't like the vibe. It was decently tuned. The Emberon boss had so many fucking bugs on it that I think like that boss
Yeah,
actually
that boss is a
fucked that dungeon
disaster.
up with the number of bugs that it had. I think it was an actual problem. And then just like poor visibility with like the orbs floating around being hard to see. Like that was just a poorly designed boss. I would at best, I think, put this C tier, and I think if I wasn't playing God comp, it would drop even more than that.
I think
C's supposed to
it's
be.
definitely better than Quarter Stars. I think this is like high C.
Yeah,
Ooh,
I
high
think I'm
C.
down for that.
It's not quite B, but I think I thought the boss fights were cool.
Yeah, the
trash
boss fights
pulls
are
were-
good. All the boss
Like,
fights,
I
except for the
liked,
second last.
one thing I liked, I guess, was the pacing of the dungeons. It was like, all right, you start off big old lust pull, then you go boss, like then you do like one trash pull, sort of like you sort of just go like big trash pull boss, big trash pull boss, and it's sort of like there's not a lot of like breaks or like downtime or like boring pulls versus like in Algathar how you have like the mini boss with the cyclones. That's like the biggest buzzkill that like completely hurts momentum in a dungeon.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I mean, this was the one I did a lot because like when I started playing Baron this season, this was like I think like one of the most fun to tank. Just massive pulls, and it was super sick. And
Yeah.
really all the bosses in there were really good except for Emberon. I think like all of them, even the totem boss, first boss, you rarely get to like 3 target cleave. But I don't know, it's a good, nice little boss. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like if tuning wasn't so brutal in this dungeon, I would rank it very highly too. But because it's so brutal, I will have to take some points away from it.
What do you think, Dratnos?
I
Same
personally
thing?
feel
C?
like it's B or
Yeah.
A, but I'm fine with C.
I think C is appropriate here. Like this is another one where it's just kind of like a feeling when you get the key. So my brain is trying to say all these nice things about the dungeon, but I hesitate to go high on a dungeon that just has a visceral negative feeling about it.
Yeah. All right, last Dragonflight dungeon before the Mega Dungeon. We have Halls of Infusion. Kind of a stinker, right?
Yeah, shit
Major
stinks.
stinker. Worst Dragonflight specific dungeon, I think. I think D is fair. I think there are some okay things about this dungeon. But like the amount of kicks required, especially in the beginning area, was insane. The fact that the run back was massive was terrible.
You did get a speed buff
the,
though.
the fact that you needed Mass Dispel to do the first boss was like very strange. The whole end area with the waves and the the dragons and stuff was terrible. That area was super frustrating. The last boss I
Bosses
thought was like,
sucked.
yeah,
Last
like,
boss
I
was
don't know, there's
bad.
just, I think third boss was a fun healer boss. And
Third boss is just good.
At the end, healer
I think third boss is actually just a.
I don't
just a good
think
boss.
Frog was that bad. I think the Frog was like a mid okay boss. So I mean, again, it's not the worst dungeon in the world, but it's pretty bad. Like I think it's worse than Neltharis, worse.
I
than
think the
Temple.
stops and
I
the
think Bottom was
casts,
D.
the stops and casts at the beginning is extremely ridiculous for like most people. And even I mean, if you just didn't have God comp stops, you were just fucking pulling nothing, or you were dead.
Let's talk
But
about
Orbs
in the
just cast it way
beginning.
too frequently.
In the beginning, you go left or right. If you go left, you get the engineering like extra life cheat death thing, and if you go right, you get respawn points. Like in like not even respawn points, but like slightly faster ways back if you wipe. And it's like, dude,
Bro, what the fuck are you
Like,
talking about right now? I have no idea what you're talking about.
You open
don't
the
know?
door so that you could come back faster if you
What
wiped
the
later.
Bro, I
Yeah,
have
if you go
no
right, you get
idea.
triple balls in your face.
Yeah.
Fucking holy shit! I didn't know that. All right, all right, that's fucking crazy. All right, so low D, not Shadow Moon tier.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think it's
So-
I don't think it's as bad.
The bosses,
as Shadow Moon, but I
the
do think
bosses
it's quite
alone,
bad.
some of the bosses are just make it better than Shadow Moon. All right, we have 4 dungeons they brought back. A couple from BFA, one from Legion, and one from way long time ago. Start with the 2 BFA ones. Underrot and Freeholes. Do Underrot first.
S.
Holy, there it is.
I mean, I love Underrot. Underrot is so good. The bosses are all interesting, except the first boss is like kind of whatever. The second boss room, I love. I love the ability to improvise in that room based on the situation. It's like one massive trash pull focusing down a specific mob and like kind of moving when those mobs die. I've just always loved that decision making. I think the changes they made to Underrot in this season felt like the cast change to the little worms, like those mobs actually felt better. Like they added some stuff that didn't feel super bullshit and was fun to play. Underrot fucking bangs.
S, and I don't even
Yeah.
feel like I need to defend that.
I feel like we've talked about these dungeons a lot, so I don't know. Like, I personally enjoyed them a lot, but do feel like they've made some negative changes too at the same time.
Negative changes? Like what'd they change?
Like increasing the amount of count required in Underrot specifically.
Really,
Yeah,
I didn't.
They added some worms.
I
to
didn't
the
feel
end.
that at
Yeah.
all. I felt like that was you just AoE'd stuff down on top of the worms. I don't know if that felt really bad.
Yeah, but it just felt like, there was more required count instead of just like, okay, if you want to play a little bit more at the end, or if you want to play a little bit more at the beginning.
Well, the worms are
I
just
don't-
annoying,
yeah,
right?
I don't know,
Like,
it's hard to
it
say.
requires more kicks.
Yeah.
Like the dungeons do not need more kicks. At the same time, like what if it's like sanguine or certain affixes, it feels worse. Like it's just one of those things where like it didn't really feel better, and sometimes it felt worse. Also, like the end too, like you're doing the big guys with the worms, but also you couldn't knock the big guys anymore, the matrons. The biggest problem to me in that dungeon was like the matrons being one-shotty, but you get that out of the way early. I don't know, there's not a lot I have to complain about in this dungeon. I think it's high.
Every time I
ARS.
run Underrot, I'm a happy man. It's a good key.
Yeah.
It's a good key.
It did have a little bit of the like easiest key, therefore you ran it a lot thing that we talked about with Shadow Moon, but it was a lot less offensive, right?
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, that's a point against that. I think that we genuinely just think that Court and Shadow Moon are bad dungeons. Because Underrot, you would run to reroll all the time, but it was fun and we like it.
Yeah, exactly. Like how it makes bad dungeons worse when you have to do them all the time, but no one's gonna complain about spam running a sick dungeon, right? I mean, in the last couple expansions, you spent 2 years doing the same fucking dungeons, right? And people look back on BFA really fondly, even though the dungeons didn't swap because BFA just had a ton of fucking banger dungeons. All right, Freehold. I think that this is my favorite dungeon ever, so I would put this at the top of S. But when I did it again, I noticed that the shark boss, it was like, okay, that mechanic's kind of bad. The last boss doesn't necessarily feel great, but I love the way you can pull trash. I love how you can change it up. There's just like always a pack that makes sense for the mob count you need, and I like the changes they made to the stuff in the second boss room.
I think they made some good, some bad changes. I think the way they fixed the bosses was good. They made the last boss interesting. They made the first boss fair. I think the problem. So number one, the guys that shout. I don't even know like
that
how
was
you
bad.
do that without a paladin, right? Because you don't have like Devo and like Bubble Sack and stuff. Like those guys were terrible. I hated that you couldn't kick that spell anymore. I hated that you had to do the last pack with the last boss. Like I think the whole thing about what made Freehold good was the fact that you can change up your routes, and so adding mandatory packs to Freehold I think was bad.
That's a good point.
So I think I actually, yeah, I also don't think the boss fights in Freehold are very good. Like, I think the boss fights, in my opinion, I've always said that the boss fights hold Freehold back from being S tier to me, and I think, like, they made it even worse than it was. So I would have this in, like, mid-A, but I don't know. Everyone else loves Freehold.
My problem with Freehold is I'm always going to compare this Freehold to BFA Freehold. BFA Freehold was sick, maybe my favorite dungeon of all time.
Yeah, this one
This
is
was
just
a-
worse.
It's a lesser version of that. And so, regardless of how good Freehold in Dragonflight is, I'm going to compare it to BFA Dragonflight, and it's worse than that. And so, it's tough for me to call it S tier. Yeah, honestly, there's probably dungeons that I would put it behind an A tier. It just kind of left a sour taste in my mouth that I was like, this dungeon fucking owned in BFA, and then you made it worse.
Yeah, why did that maybe that's like a criticism, right? Like So the changes they made had to have been because they thought it was going to make the dungeon better.
Well, many of them did. Like the boss changes were really good, right? Like
The boss changes.
Skycap and Craig doesn't one-shot you anymore, and Eudora doesn't
Well, it
one-shot
still
you
one-shots
anymore.
you,
Well,
but
okay, it does one-shot you, but it doesn't one-shot you on a plus 16 anymore. You know, Eudora doesn't one-shot you. The last boss, Harlan, has like interesting mechanics now and is actually a difficult boss in and of itself, rather than just because you pull stuff with it. I guess they did remove like the cannoning down the packs stuff kind of midway through that season, which is a bit fun detective-y for us. And then also I think the shout mobs. I don't remember them in BFA being that much. I don't know if that was a change from BFA.
No, they didn't shout.
Oh, that was.
They just tossed you around.
Yeah, that was some nonsense change there.
That was some nonsense.
Yeah, the shout was crazy because like this has been a thing this expansion where like they did this on Ataldazar, right? Where you have things that can be kicked like Yasma's cast, but then they're like, okay, well we actually want you guys to deal with this every time. They probably have the Yasma thing hitting like a little too hard, but like I think Yasma's a better boss with that happening just as a healing profile. It just scales out of control too fast. But like it's kind of the same thing in Freehold, except it's just I don't know. It's like why Quaking was bad. Having any cast in this game very similar to Necrotic for tanks or Spiteful for melee. Having casts go off and then interrupt your spell cast is just dog shit. Like it's just a bad mechanic. Like no mechanic should ever do that in this game. It just only feels bad. So like that was good or that was bad, and then also the damage it did was just something that scaled out of control way too fast. Like your group was super comp reliant on living that, and that was just way too hard of a singular point of emphasis to be difficult.
I will say Freehold does one thing that every single dungeon should do. Lots of mobs, and we have minimal mechanics.
Yeah, the fact that you can like do some pulls where it's just like, oh yeah, this pull has 2 harpooners and then 3 guys whose names I don't know.
And every single mob just has like one mechanic at the very most.
And it's like that's sick because then you can pull that with stuff, and you can construct a pull of 3 different packs of different mobs that do, and you're pulling 15 mobs, but you only need to know what 6 of them do instead of what all 15 of them do.
Every single dungeon needs to do this.
Yeah.
The way it
so
feels
nice.
when after you kill the first boss, what it feels like to run up to 6 or 7 mobs, whatever that feels like in Freehold, it should feel like in every dungeon because that feeling is perfect. Like no matter what 7 mobs you pull in that dungeon, it's gonna be great. So, what do y'all think?
I'm thinking
go?
A.
I'd probably put it like mid A.
Mid A, Dorky.
Yeah, I'm okay with mid A.
I'm okay with that. But only under the acknowledgement that BFA Freehold would be at the top of
BFA
S.
Freehold S tier.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. All right. We have 2 more left from this season, I think. Neltharian's Lair. Let's do that.
That shit stinks. Put it in C or D, personally. I didn't enjoy Neltharian's Lair back in Legion. I still don't like it.
I feel like it was one of the
dog
weaker
dungeon.
Legion dungeons. I was surprised they brought it back.
Bosses.
Oh, all the bosses suck too. Like, the first boss is okay, I guess, but the snake, the last boss, the totem guy, they're all kind of whatever.
It's kind of stinky, but it also isn't like super offensive. So,
I mean, would you rather zone into Nelth's Lair or Temple?
Nelth's Lair.
I'd put it in C. I'd put it in C.
Yeah, I think C's good.
Dude, Dratnos fucking hates Temple, by the way. It's the most used
That dungeon is... I hate it.
Temple has a distinction of being like the one dungeon where normally you talk about storming as an affix and you're like, it's annoying, but at least it doesn't get you killed. And then Temple found a way to fucking kill you with storming.
Yeah. Okay, pretty easy. I put it at the bottom of C. Ahead, or do you think D ahead of Temple?
I think C's
I'm down
okay.
for D too, honestly. I don't care. C or D.
D is definitely a tank opinion. Tanks don't like that dungeon.
Really? Why? Wait, so who likes Neltharian Lair then, if not tanks?
Well, because for the rest of us, the dungeon was pretty fucking chill. Like, I don't know. I'm not too scared of shit.
What, dude? It's way harder on the healer, I feel like, without the tank.
No, like that first pull in that dungeon, like the tank's like, oh, please fucking save my life. Oh, God.
What the
stop
fuck,
this
dude?
fucking trash from hitting
You must
me.
have not been playing with a bear tag or something, because you just fucking go there and just press thrash and you're good. But for fucking the pelters, man, they're just like shitting on the healer, and then there's the snake boss. Fucking Neuraxis.
Oh, maybe it's because I
whatever the
played
hell.
Paladin. Maybe that's why I didn't give a shit. It was like, that guy died again. Okay,
These
well,
guys
run
kinda
back,
just
bud.
like shit on everyone.
All right, Vortex Pinnacle, Cata
Their
Dungeon.
shit stinks.
Oh yeah, I think this is another contender for F. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's any redeeming part of this dungeon that doesn't put it.
The
in
se-
F tier for me.
the second boss is pretty good. How they brought that back, the little wind guy, and you take the little
Yeah.
jump before the.
That was cool. That was a good.
Second
boss.
boss is pretty
For
good.
sure.
First boss, honestly, not bad. Like I thought first boss was, but
It was kinda boring.
basically every
Yeah.
trash pack in this dungeon sucked ass.
Yeah,
They
trash
were
was
like
miserable
all bad.
for sure.
And the last boss is
And it
like
was
historically
giggling
the
here.
last boss is historically bad and should be the final thing they ever need to see to never make an end boss
yeah,
in a
put it in F.
dungeon have ads that are that difficult and scale on that many levels. All right, put it in F ahead of Shadow Moon.
Yeah, trash was just
Yeah.
fucking annoying.
I'm really trying to find redeeming qualities about this dungeon. I think second boss is like literally the only thing.
Yeah, the trash bowls
That
where you like
shield guy.
You know, okay, how do you guys feel about the trash bowls where when you get targeted by something, you have to go into that little electric triangle? Like some active trash mechanic being targeted by things. It's like kind of like line of
I mean, it's
sighting,
interesting,
but
I
it's
guess.
like just less annoying than line of sight. Like, is that like something they could do more of?
I thought that was fun. Like it's
It was fine, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was a fine part of some awful trash pulls that would just cast stomp or whatever.
Yeah,
and blow up
The
your
main
whole group.
problem with those pulls was like weren't there like 2 casters per pull that could like never get a cast off.
Yeah,
And
holy
then one of
smite.
those like
one-
you
one
needed
cast,
2
it's over.
double melee kicks or something.
Dude, is Shadow Moon
Yeah,
worse
and
than
then the
Vortex?
stomps and
I feel like
Yeah.
Well,
I
Shadow
know.
Moon is strictly
I-
just
I
like
feel-
miserable.
I feel like
Shadow Moon bricked the whole season. Vortex was just one key of that season.
I felt Vortex was the worst dungeon probably of this expansion.
oh,
Personally,
I,
I'd
I
say
think
Shadow
as a
Moon.
dungeon, Vortex is worse. Shadow Moon, because of the easy factor, impacted that season much more than Vortex
you had to
did.
do it way like for Vortex
Yeah.
was like the hardest key to time, right? So like you actually, even though it was bad, you didn't do it a lot. Shadow Moon is
Yeah.
extra bad because it was just as bad as Vortex, but you just had to do it the whole time too. Like you were forced to do it. I can see that. All right, so we did a little stop after season 1, and we noted how like 3 of the 4 Dragonflight dungeons were in A or B.
Oof.
This season, we have
Oof.
the number 1 is in B. We have 1 in C, 1 in and 2 in D for Dragon. So season 2's Dragonflight dungeons are significantly worse.
JB mentioned something about Og being present in this season and not present in season 1, but then we didn't really talk about it at all this season. How much has augmentation had an effect on any of these rankings at all, or any of these dungeons?
I feel like it'll have
Any
a
of these
when we
opinions?
talk about season 1 versus season 2 versus season 3. I feel like that has
Okay.
to come up, but I doubt that Og existing changed your like opinion on these dungeons specifically, right? Like maybe Og existing would have made some of them feel worse because like it would have been impossible to survive some of them without it, that kind of thing. But there would have just been a key level that you got to where that ended up being the case anyway, you know? Like I don't know if that really matters.
It made, I think, Oldemon a very different dungeon due to bleed removal. Like that changed overnight with the introduction of Og. I think it changed the way that like some of the healer checks felt. Like Halls of Infusion, like third boss, I think changed dramatically when you got into God comp, specifically with like Og, or some of the healing checks for like last boss Vortex Pinnacle or something like that. There was definitely some fights that sucked a lot more ass at the start of the season that suddenly became like, oh, this isn't that bad anymore.
Yeah, well, to
Yeah,
me, these dungeons were fucked in the beginning of season 1.
Yeah,
Season 2.
like I think it's not necessarily the existence of Og, but it's more so like, did you have God comp or did you not? Because like certain things with like Mass Dispel, if you didn't have, or if you didn't have an H-Pal. But in my opinion, like let's be honest, in season 2, if you didn't play God comp, you weren't playing. Like, you couldn't even get invited to pugs.
yeah,
if you
we,
didn't have
like,
God comp.
I think a lot of these dungeons would have been remembered very differently if you played literally anything except God comp. Like
Yeah,
Halls of
like,
Infusion,
even
if you
Priest.
didn't have Soothe to get past all the
Yeah.
annoying shit, you would have hated Halls of Infusion even more.
Bro, there's a ton of master spells too. Like I feel like even just removing priest utility from that group would have
Yeah,
it would
that's
have
what
made the
I'm saying.
dungeon
It's
so
not
much
even
different.
just Og. It's like a lot of the stuff that you had in that comp you needed.
Yeah. All right, on to season 3. I guess we'll start. We have been doing Dragonflight dungeons first the whole time, so we can do that here too. With Galakron's Fall and Rise, starting with Fall.
I mean, it was kind of like nice and chill and enjoyable to do at the start, but bro, this dungeon, I don't like it anymore. I
This
put it
dun-
in like C personally.
I may even put it in D. The only part of this dungeon, the only reason this dungeon doesn't get dragged a lot harder than it should is because the timer is so fucking free, and the key that you can die infinity times and still time it. And so mistakes that would normally blow the key are instead, you can wipe like 3 fucking times in the second boss room and be like, no, it's fine, just release, like it's fine, we still have time. but the like everything up to first boss I think is fine. Second boss is one of the more once you figure out the tactics on it, it's not so bad, but it's an annoying boss for a healer. Like having to like track. If there wasn't a weak ore telling you when somebody was standing in the zone, it would be like 10 times worse. The sand area, the tuning on the number of debuffs that come out in that area.
That shit is you just die over and over.
Yeah, you just accept that you're gonna die like 10.
Yeah, that's like a
times
10 death minimum.
If the release point wasn't 50 yards away from where the pull was happening, it would be incredibly tilting. Like the dungeon is saved almost by accident. By the fact that it has a free timer and a forgiving release point.
Yeah, imagine if timer was tight, people would fucking hate that dungeon.
And then the last boss is one of those bosses again that like it just as the dungeon starts going up in level, it just starts taking I think the last time I killed it on Tyrannical was like an 8-minute fight.
I'm pretty sure that's the longest fight this entire expansion. Like, is there any boss fight that lasts longer than that fucking Iridicron?
I don't think so.
All right, DPS player take. I fucking love doing this key. This is the one I find myself trying to do the most this expansion. You like pull a bunch of shit with the first boss. That's sick. The second room, yeah, there's a bunch of debuffs. I'm a fucking DPS, right? Just fucking dispel me, and I'm pulling.
Yeah, this is the melee.
Well, you're
I'm
this is hard.
Yeah,
melee
but then
and I said
you're
that
like dying on CD, and it's so painful.
And then you're pulling these mobs, and it's fine. And then like you do the second boss. The second boss, the fact that if you're moving when it gets dispelled and it still one shots you is just like, how the fuck is that still a thing? Or the fact that it doesn't tell you to stand still when you get dispelled on it in the dungeon journal. Like, that's really confusing. And that, like, just absolutely farmed pugs for a month or two. And then the dragon area feels bad. Like having to pull, like, double pulling them is cool, but at a certain point you can't. But, like, doing one dragon at a time feels pretty rough. I don't know if the third boss is any good. It's, like, kind of a, like, mechanic vomit at the end. And the last boss is genuinely bad. Jdotb, is that his name? That boss is not good. That is not a good boss. It lasts way too long. It's super boring. Like, nothing's happening. I think that one's a problem.
I think.
Yeah, I would put it higher than you guys though.
I think some of the boss fights are okay. Like, I think the second boss is actually a good fight, minus like the weird bugs. I think there's some redeeming qualities to this, but I say it's not good enough to be in B. I would say like it's around Oldemon level where it's like there's some fun stuff about it. It's not terrible, but it's not real. Like, I can't really like try for people who are saying A. Like, what are the really good things about this dungeon? You know what I mean?
As a DPS, it's just a satisfying dungeon. I don't know how else to put it. It's just a satisfying dungeon. Like all the pulls feel good.
It has a goated first pull where you just grab a shitload of you have lust, you just slam trash right into boss. The boss isn't like moving around.
The second boss is actually the second boss is actually a good fight.
The second boss is engaging.
I think all the bosses, if you're doing this at like a reasonable lowish key level, I think they feel kind of like raid boss fights because they actually have some like interesting-ish mechanics that you have to play against in kind of interesting ways. It just does not scale really well into high keys because, Blood of Corruption stops being a fight about managing a debuff in an interesting way and like thinking about when to transfer it, and is much more just like hope you bought some shadow melds, right? I hope you get targeted with your shadow meld people, and then you trivialize a mechanic that's otherwise just like insane HPS requirement. And so I think this key Iridicron as well just scales really poorly into high key levels, but a lot of people just doing weekly 20s, this is like the most, and I think mega dungeons have been like this the last few expansions where like you just get these keys that have more stuff going on that matters, but then becomes overtuned as the key goes up.
I would put it in B, but it sounds like I'm alone, so it can go in C.
I'm okay with
C tier at best. C tier at best.
Okay. C tier at best.
All right, C it is. All right, the other one.
I actually have found Rise was one of my least favorite dungeons when it first came out.
Oh shit!
It has grown on me. I would say.
Wait, Jay, before you continue, I healed this key last night. And then I was like, oh, hey, this dungeon's actually kind of fun to heal. And then people in my chat were like, oh, dude, JB fucking hates this dungeon. So it's kind of funny that you're bringing it up right now.
Well, as it's been nerfed, it's gotten better. And as I think people have figured out how to do it, how to do the dungeon, it's gotten better. But it has some of the most overtuned trash. in terms of just literally just the fucking dragons in here are probably the most dangerous trash mobs in terms of just raw HPS that have existed this expansion. I despise the fucking gauntlet game. Like,
really, I love that. I love it. I thought it was gonna be bad. It's like takes no time if you fuck it up. Some people are clicking on some shit and you can one shot it almost every time. It's like a little something. I mean,
I don't fuck it up very often. I just don't think it should exist in a dungeon like that. I just don't like on principle. I just don't like things like that.
How do you guys feel about that? That, by the way, the like mid.
I think I'm on JB's side in that I don't like that it's in the dungeon. However, I'm also on your side in that I like the implementation of it. Like, I like the idea that, like, you know, it takes roughly the same amount of time no matter what, because you're opening the portal and like then you get the portal, and if you're like, you know, me and you suck at getting through it, you can just click on the portal. The one thing that's a little annoying about it is everyone's doing it at the same time. So like it's almost like not good to go with everybody, because then you get like random orbs that are like unpredictable. So I don't know. This dungeon kind of grew on me a little bit too. I know the first area is really tough for pugs, but I think the first area of this dungeon is actually really, really cool in the sense that there's lots of different trash. All of the trash is like pretty straightforward. Either there's like a tank thingy, like sort of like a frontal, and there's a caster that has one important cast that goes off that you have to kick sometimes. And then you kind of have to like cleave off the mini bosses, and there's like lots of different ways to pull that area. I think that area is really cool. Then the rest of the dungeon is meh. Like, I think, yeah, I don't know. That's another like kind of like mid-ish dungeon. Besides that, though, like there's not really a lot of other. I guess the last boss is like kind of okay. I guess.
Really, I think the last boss kind of stinky.
I like the last boss.
Maybe a healer thing.
Yeah, I like the last boss in terms of like maybe the sand is like a little annoying. If your group's not good about dropping it, but there's a decent pace to it. I think the dungeon definitely suffers from RP more than any other dungeon in this expansion, in terms of both like waiting on things to happen and traveling. Like portals should just there should be a rule, like rules for Mythic Plus design, and like portals that take you someplace where you actually watch your character fly through the air should not exist ever. If you are making a dungeon where that is a thing, delete that.
Yeah.
At the very least, if you do it once per dungeon and then you have to run back, it should be instant. I don't know.
Yeah, nobody enjoys watching that. It's not immersive. There's nothing cool about it. It's barely an interesting thing the very first time I ever do it, and then from that point on, it is a net negative for every other time I run the dungeon.
True.
Also, Rise or Dawn of the Infinite, both dungeons suffer from the worst dungeon map I've ever seen in the Dungeon Journal. It is literally worthless. You cannot see your teammates on it if they're not in the same mini zone area as you. So we had a key that got blown because we were playing with a guy who didn't really know his way around, and he released and he tried to run back. Literally got lost and couldn't fucking find us because he just didn't know where the fuck he was going, and the map did nothing to help him. So for all of the like non-mechanics reasons in the dungeon, it's one of the worst. Also the lore in it is really fucking confusing.
Oh, who cares about that? That one room with the sand is fucking horrible. That is bad, right? Like where you're killing like the one mob at a time and AoEing down some dudes that flashbang your screen and clear a little sand. Like that has to be one of the worst feeling trash rooms in the history of Mythic Plus.
Dude, all I know is that I healed this for the first time on 29 last night. This was an easy and time key.
Fuck yeah, Dorky. Let's fucking go. All right, is it F or is it D or is it C?
I think like
I'd put it in D. I think.
I don't think it's F.
For me, I think like middle of C, I think is fair, but maybe I like it too much, I guess.
Well,
I would
go with C. Maybe
it's a good healer dungeon.
I do think it should be penalized for like the RP and shit. Like, there's a lot of elements of the dungeon in terms of like meta dungeon design that I think are just not good. Like things that they should never be done in a dungeon.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's a lot of violations in there, but I guess I complained about those so much and they just kept doing them, and I kind of felt defeated, and I'm like,
well, I mean,
I'm just like, okay.
You just have to say the dungeon has like that sand room, which is horrible. It has super overtuned dragons. It has a ton of RP. And then the only thing that would save that from being an F tier dungeon is if it had like awesome, really interactive bosses or trash, but then it also has like that thing where you have to go through that you all don't like. And I feel like the bosses at best are just mid, you know? Like, I don't know. I think it definitely sounds, from your all's description, it sounds much more of a D than a C, but...
I mean,
I was actually ready to give it a C, I think, when I was beginning.
I mean, you guys are going to put it
spiel.
next to Temple of Jade Serpent?
I think for a lot of people in chat, at least, whether they have to zone into Temple or Rise, it would be a very similar feeling. I think it's both.
I think Temple and Rise are pretty similar. Like, they're both brutally tough and very, you know...
Yeah,
there's
I think a lot of people don't like Rise 2 because it's harder. Well, they nerfed the timer a little bit, but I mean the boss HP or whatever they did. But yeah, I don't know.
Okay, all right. We have now 6 dungeons they brought back this patch, which have a lot of them are pretty solid. So starting with Blackrock Hold.
I am so bored of this dungeon. I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
Like,
I didn't
C
like it
for
in
me.
Legion. I actually feel like it got better in
I fucking
Legion because
hated it
in
in
Legion, shit literally one
Yeah,
shot.
it got better than Legion. Yep.
So there, you can at least like survive. I mean, for anybody that didn't play this dungeon in Legion, the trash after first boss, if you played a melee character, you actually had to LOS. Anytime you did
shoot.
not have a defensive rolling, you had to be line of sight until you had a defensive back, and then you could come out and pop CDs in your defensives and then go back around the corner until your defensives. Else, you had to outrange everything. You had to play it 40 yards away. You tried to bring as many casters as you could to this dungeon because you could outrange all the mechanics, but anything that you actually got hit by would like one-shot you. That is no longer the case, which makes the dungeon. But this has some of the most boring bosses. First boss is like an actual patchwork boss. The second boss is not much better.
Bro, the second boss for ranged is absolutely terrible, right?
Oh,
like
yeah,
if you're like
the
the
fact
only
that you
range.
get chased around, like it's Third boss is another fight where like, you know, maybe slightly you like maybe you have to like check if a thing's gonna one shot you. That's like the only thing you have to turn your brain on for that fight. And then last boss is actually like an interesting boss in terms of like it being a healing check and having to dodge stuff and DPS stuff, and but definitely is a dungeon that I feel like my brain is not engaged for half of it.
I will say the trash, if you can handle it well, the trash, again, DPS brain, the trash after the second boss is fun. It's nice.
It is definitely fun now that they've made it not one-shot you. You have to pay attention to it and stop it.
The trash and the mini boss at the beginning is bad. The first boss is bad. The second boss is pretty bad. Third boss is one of those that, like, pretty early on in the key levels relative to other dungeons. The boss, it's such an interesting, weird thing for metas in Mythic Plus where, like, in, like, 28s and 29s on Tyran, your class now no longer has to do good damage. You just have to have enough passive defensiveness or buttons to survive a boss screaming at you every 15 seconds and will one-shot you if you are not a super strong, you know what I mean? Like, that third boss has, like, some problems there. The trash after that is fun, and then the last boss is, like, mid. But it's not a dog shit dungeon. Like, I feel like it's okay, you know?
No, it's not bad.
Yeah,
it's
okay.
Just forgettable, I think.
Just kind of boring.
It's not a great...
It's okay.
It's another dungeon that has some unfortunate interactions with affixes like Sanguine as well.
Yeah, it's got I mean, it's just better than it was in Legion. It was a pretty bad Legion dungeon. I was definitely surprised with how much I like running Blackrock Hold for how much I really didn't like running it in Legion. It's okay.
True.
Yeah,
I would say
it's
low
fine.
B, high C's.
Wow, B. Holy.
Low B. Like,
B
I think
for,
it's nowhere. I think it's nowhere close to B.
B
when I
for
look
Black.
at what's on
I would
C
say,
tier,
like-
I don't like C tier. Like the C tier dungeons are dungeons where I like didn't look forward to. Blackrock Hold is just like I'm like I don't mind going in it. I'm not looking forward to it. I don't hate it.
I think
It's just a homework key. It's like a better Shadow Moon.
Yeah, but not that much better.
I think it's a good bit better than Shadow Moon. Shadow Moon was like fucking dreadfully boring, especially when you got to Bone Maw. Holy fuck! There were so many late nights where I was just tired as fuck, and I'm like eyes closing.
Oh yeah, dude, we
Just
would
trying to
fall
get through
asleep on
Bone Maw.
By the way, I think someone in chat is right, JB. I think the like tier is kind of C. Like C is the tier, D is ain't no way, and F is like how did this
B
get
is like
made?
mid, right?
And B,
like
yeah,
mid,
B
right?
B is like this is pretty good, and A is like this is real good, and S is like this is very nice. I like this.
Very nice.
If it goes on C, I think it should go above every other C.
Okay, I'll do that. All right, Dark Heart Thick. I like this one better in Legion, but I think it's because I was tanking in Legion and I wasn't a melee on the first boss. in a pug, which is it's simply the most terrifying thing to ever happen is to do the first boss of Darkheart Thicket as a melee with a pug tank.
I didn't like this dungeon, but I swear it's like kind of grown on me a bit. I still don't think it's great, but I don't know. I definitely enjoy this one more than Blackrock Hold in terms of Legion dungeons.
I will say
I don't like this dungeon.
This is another kind of dungeon to me. Like the only trash I think in here that I really have a problem with is probably the shit at the start, and it would be just mostly RNG about how many poisoners you get, and cats kind of suck.
Oh, that's
yeah,
just bad.
stupid
RNG on the mobs that spawn in your dungeon is really
yeah.
bad.
Yeah,
That's
that's
really
so
bad.
dumb.
I didn't even think about that, but that's a
Port of
big
Stars.
problem. Like one of them's easy and the other one's fucking gonna kill the fuck out of you. How can that happen?
The other thing about this dungeon, I feel like Xavius is a very poorly designed boss fight in terms of his abilities. I think Nightmare Bolt should never be able to target a healer. I think it's ridiculous that you can put a fucking like very short radius zone on a healer who has to cast spells to heal. Like
What the hell? It should never go on a boomkin. That's what.
And not only that, but then in the second phase of the fight, you then put swirlies on the ground to force you to like move around, which makes it virtually impossible to stay with somebody with Nightmare Bolt on them. Like the swirlies resolve so quickly, you just have to move as soon as you see it, which means you're just going to go like the shortest direction you can to get out of it, which means you're probably going to break contact with whoever has the Nightmare Bolt swirly on you, or the Nightmare Bolt radius. And if that's the healer and they're trying to keep somebody alive, that person's now going to die. So I really dislike, and the fact that he can get fucking stacks of damage buffs from standing and shit on the ground. It's just like, it's in my opinion a very poorly designed fight that lends itself to people dying, not through like misplays necessarily, but just through bad RNG. And it's at least better, I think, in that sense than it was in Legion. I think they tuned it down a little bit, but I really don't think that's a well-designed boss at all.
There are mobs after the first boss, before the second boss, called Keepers, which have twice the health as the blossoms that they prevent from being able to take damage or die.
Absolute banger mobs.
And they give less count than each individual blossom.
Dude, it's good. The blossoms just turn into training dummies whenever there's a keeper around, and that's what we love. We love training dummies.
Yeah, that's something about that ain't quite right. So the idea that it's another pug difference, right? A pug route is always going to pull the keepers. And if you're doing this place and you're trying to do it well, pulling a keeper would be unbelievably stupid. And it shouldn't be that way. It's just something is wrong with the mob count, or so I don't know. How that hasn't been fixed since Legion is crazy.
I don't know. I think this dungeon has everything that you don't do with a linear dungeon. The respawn point is ridiculous. There's only one respawn point. It's the second boss. I think that there's like very little that you can pull, and you mostly require like Shroud or Invis or like skips or whatever to skip mobs that are like way worse. You know, stuff like Keepers. I think there's like very few trash pulls that are fun at all. Like I can't think of like any trash pull that's like you do a bunch of mobs or like whatever. Like every single one has like really nasty, unforgiving mechanics. Like the stalkers that you have to just stand 1 pixel in melee. The cats that have the bleed that just takes you to 1% health instantly. Like I don't know. I really don't like this dungeon.
All right.
I do like that you can spawn infinity fucking ads on third boss.
Yep, that is a
That
banger.
is a good one. Yeah.
Third boss
It
is
should be that. Every boss should have that.
Third boss is just a
Every-
good boss. That's a good one.
Every boss should just be surrounded in whelps.
Yep.
No, I do like third boss. I agree that I think third boss is fun.
Y'all
I don't
thinking
know. I would
C
put
or
this,
D?
like-
Is this
I would put
eh?
this low C, high
Is it
D.
is it
Like,
eh
this is,
or
like,
avoid?
I think C. I think this doesn't deserve to be down with Marissa.
Yeah, I don't think
I would
it's
put this
very
high
low,
C. I
but
would put
it's
this high
definitely
C
bad.
somewhere.
Okay. Oh, big banger. Waycrest Manor. That rhymed.
Ooh, dude, this one's a hard one.
Better than its BFA version.
It's not hard
Oh,
for
yeah.
me. I fucking
you
love this
think
place.
so?
I think
I don't know.
Waycrest fucking pipes.
No way.
The only thing is that the tree and the stun is bad.
It's so good and bad at the same time. I've never felt this way about a dungeon before. Actually, maybe a little bit later, but it's like I really enjoy the dungeon because of like the poles, but at the same time, the tree boss is miserable. The gorgers are buggy.
Oh yeah,
They
that
fucking
gorgeous.
ruined the snap spot.
This is what I was saying earlier when JB was like, "Oh, they removed this, but they didn't realize like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, Dude, Boomkin's pre-going bear form on every single tree. Like, you think they want to do that? No, but like the tree thing is so brutal. And then what do? They make it so you can't shapeshift it. The Gorgers, like, do you think everyone wanted to sit on the fountain? No, like, but you know, like I think Etch, like, it's just so
Etch is
weird. They
bad,
took
yeah.
away so much good counterplay in this dungeon to try and make it more difficult instead of just like a numbers tuning thing, because like clearly the timer's too long. But at the same time, like, I don't know, it's still a banger dungeon. I think the bosses, minus the tree boss, are pretty good. Yeah, I don't know. This is to me an above average dungeon. I don't mean to be
Same.
a downer. I'm mainly just complaining. It's sort of like Freehold, right? Like, I'm not trying to be a downer. I'm just saying, like, I am sad that they made it worse rather than better.
Dude,
But I do like. I will say that having all the doors open at the beginning, huge W.
Huge
that's
dub.
a
Very, very good.
huge dub.
So JB, you said it was like better, but why?
Well, having all the doors open was a big, like, that was. I don't know that there's ever been a more depressing moment in Mythic Plus history than putting your key in Waycrest Manor and seeing that you got fucking,
Dude.
like,
I mean,
top
VR is
right.
some
Oh,
pretty depressing
God.
moments.
Dude, you would like. I remember back in that expansion, I would do like a 29. You'd barely deplete it, and it was like a top left run, and you were like, okay, that's we can do it, we can do it. And then the next 2 times you put in the keystone, you'd get top right, and it was just, oh god.
Dude, top
Oh,
right was
God.
insane.
So it's because it's so. I mean, it's not only is it a shittier route, it's just hard to mentally fucking come back from that. Like
Yeah.
everybody's like, okay, top left, top left, top left. You put it in, it's top right, and just everybody's mental is just boomed instantly. You're like, oh great, okay, well you guys want to just fucking walk out. So
Well, would
that
you say
sucked.
anything else was a good change?
I think a lot of the things in Waycrest that I had the biggest problem with were affix, like the way that affixes affected that dungeon, and a lot of the worst affixes in there have either been nerfed or removed.
Yeah, that's what I want to talk about.
Okay,
So
probably,
that's the thing I
yeah.
read all the time from chat is people are. I mean, there's probably I'm not reading my chat, but there's probably some people that were like, "Oh my god, but the camera angle." I think that is the most overstated, irrelevant thing ever. Like, if affixes have been nerfed so much that like. I just can't imagine you're going through Waycrest and you're constantly like upset that your camera angle is bad. I just think it's like so unimportant. It never matters. Like the
Nah, it
worst is
absolutely
like
matters
is like
sometimes.
storming. Like storming when you're
Yeah.
like fucking dashing around and shit. Like that's bad, but it's like super whatever, man. Like people say that shit like it like ruins the dungeon
it
for
absolutely
them.
matters sometimes. If there's like swirlies and then there's like a tree in your face, I think it depends on like I think Court of Stars was the biggest.
You
victim
fight
of
all
that.
the you fight a lot of the annoying trash. You pull it out of those hallways into like the courtyard anyway.
Yeah. I mean, for Waycrest, it was not as big of a deal, but that is
Like-
definitely a real problem in some places.
Getting rid of Necrotic made this dungeon way better. Getting rid of, I think, Explosive made this dungeon better. Getting rid of bolstering affecting bosses. Like, this dungeon felt so fucking bad when you had to do trash off of Raw because it was going to bolster him. Holy fuck, that was triggering.
Oh,
Back when there was long sanguine as well, you could
Yeah.
drop sanguine in under raw if you were bad, and it was just over.
So, yeah, this was a dungeon that I think the state of affixes now just makes it a lot more palatable than it was back in BFA.
Dude, I like. Someone said this dungeon is ass for someone that exclusively pugs. Bro, if I'm doing pug keys on stream, which I've done a lot this season, I seek out Waycrest Manor. I fucking love doing this dungeon.
They also
Yeah, I feel like
the
that's only the
trash
tree
at
boss
the end
that
of the
makes
dungeon. They that was a big improvement. Like they removed the counterplay of hiding in the alcove, but they
Yep.
just made those 7 mobs
Not ass.
much less annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's true.
Oh,
That's true.
Also, this place has the best RP of any dungeon.
true.
The voice
And
lines
now
in
we
this
get to
dungeon
hear-
are iconic.
We get to hear the Alliance and the Horde versions now because of cross faction. So I don't know. It's kind of great.
This is
Oh,
this is
I
an
didn't
this is an A
notice that
tier
at all.
dungeon for me, for sure.
Yeah, it would be an easy S if it wasn't for Tree Boss.
Yeah, I'm down for. Honestly, I think I'd maybe be down for like B, but A without Tree Boss. But yeah, I'm down for A.
It's going an A. All right.
Yeah, the Lady Waycrest, she has the fucking top tierest shit talking I've ever heard
Yeah.
from any mod. Like, it is legitimately the first few times I paid attention, I was like, did she fucking say that to me?
Alrighty. I don't know where I want to. I mean, I guess we'll just go in order. The other BFA, Ataldazar. This is probably gonna differ. Okay, so Ataldazar for me is pretty good. It's gonna be like A or B if you go left. But I don't know if I've done a lot of pug keys this season. If you go right in Ataldazar, it instantly jumped down 2 letter grades. Going right should be illegal. That's just bad. Never do that. And it like it makes the dungeon significantly worse for me. It just throws my whole vibe off. What do you guys think?
Yeah, they ruined. Like speaking of ruined dungeon, I think this is probably the most ruined dungeon they've ruined of all the ruined dungeons.
I don't know
The
that I feel like
juggernauts
they
are
ruined it.
fucking miserable, man.
But
I don't
yeah.
know, dude. I was doing this key last night with Fired Up, and he was having the time of his life. And by the time of his life, I mean he was just fucking screaming nonstop every 5 seconds about some shit happening. It was great.
I think that snapping is my favorite mechanic that's ever existed in
Yeah,
Mythic
and
Plus.
it's just fucking gone.
And Natal was like the poster child for snapping. So every time I zone in there, I'm probably going to pour one out for, you know, how this dungeon used to be. But I do feel like they made the dungeon not, you know, at the beginning of the season, I would have, if you'd have told me that snapping no longer existed in this dungeon, I would have been like, oh, well, everything's going to fucking murder you all the time then. It doesn't do that,
Well, it does.
which is nice.
I mean, it does, but you have to have some like different counterplay now.
Sort
like
of.
the Juggernauts, for example, they're just gonna one-shot you every time it jumps on you. Except you just have to have like a statue baiting or like some mage baiting or you know some like super cringe thing. And then if like suddenly someone spawns like a pet in melee, there goes your entire team. Or like if you happen to be 1 yard out and the Juggernaut sees you, he's gonna fucking murder you. But also, they made Yasma. I don't understand the Yasma change. The Yasma change was so bad.
What, the one where that cast just isn't interruptible?
Yeah.
I actually think that change was good. I just think that it does way too much damage. Like, if you're going to make it go through, you need to nerf the value. Like if you look at that boss healing-wise, it's just a more interesting boss when you have, like, a single target dot to heal. It's just scaling way out of control and one-shots people and does too much damage. Like, the version of that boss where it's just a kick, 5 people fighting a boss and just kicking something that casts every, like, 10 seconds is an absolute dog shit mechanic. Like, the boss, why even have the mechanic? It's, like, irrelevant, right?
Well, it's just, like, one of those things where, like, the boss is, like, out of melee, and then, you know, you have to, like, plant your ads, and then at the same time, there's, like, a kick going out.
Oh, yeah, it should cast while moving. That's a good point. That's actually a really good point. The standing still is super annoying.
Right, the real hard part is like you're trying to control the boss's movement and your group's movement while having the boss like standing still and casting.
Yeah, no, I actually
that gets
wasn't thinking
people
about that. The fact that the boss used to move a lot more fluidly because you would kick the cast is good. But I actually like a perfect version of that boss is that cast does less damage and it casts while moving, and I think that would be better than the version where it is kicked. Just it's a boss that makes more sense. So Tel'Dazar used to be like a fucking turbo banger, and then it's just a lot worse than that now. So it's no snapping, worst last boss. What are we thinking? I mean, this isn't. You think this is a C or a D?
I think it's
crazy, right? That's like
I think B
at worst it's a B.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mocha would be, but this used to be an S for me. I fucking loved Atal.
Oh, Atal was like top
Back in
top
BFA.
fucking tier BFA. Yeah.
It was such a good dungeon.
In BFA, you just lived in Atal and Freehold. That was the fucking vibe. Actually, there's so many good. Dude, Motherload was so good too.
Junkyard.
Oh, yeah, I want
You better
Motherload
be
back.
memeing. Say cap right now.
All right, that was a crazy laugh. Thrown to the tides.
Oh, this one's gonna be so polarizing. So, I really like this dungeon if I'm playing VDH or with a VDH. But if there's no VDH, it is so bad.
I think the design.
It's fun because there's a lot of like fun large poles if you can like control them. But if you can't control them, it is fucking pain and misery.
This dungeon, I think, I have a good time in this dungeon until you hit that break point where like first and third boss start one-shotting you. To that point, I find the dungeon really enjoyable.
Same.
Once you get to that point where you become afraid every time either of those bosses does a mechanic, then it goes from being enjoyable to like very fucking stressful and way too sweaty. And so if they just nerfed how much damage the first boss spellcast do and the third boss dot does, I think this would be a really good dungeon. And I had fun doing, you know, like 24, 25, 26, but you start getting to 27, 28, 29, and like you're just waiting for somebody to fall over every boss fight.
I think the design of how that mechanic works on the first boss is fucking horrible. Where you need to stand in some fucking dumbass formation to have it cleave onto the tank. That's fucking horrible. That should have never been made live.
Yeah.
The intermissions of that boss are also just like kind of a mess. Like there's just way too much shit on the ground. Second boss is good. Another bad thing. So there's like a feeling in dungeons that normally only happens on bosses where you're fighting a boss and you're like, man, I've been fighting this boss for like a couple minutes too long. And that happens on all of the mini bosses in this dungeon where you're fighting that little spear throwing bitch. Like that, you just, the first time you do this dungeon, you're like, well,
yeah, she has way too much HP.
Yeah, you're like, well, this just has too much health, right? Like the first time. You don't have to see it twice. It's like that, I think, hurts the dungeon a little bit. But man, again, DPS brain, I fucking love this dungeon, man. You like pull right off the bat, you pull everything, then you have to pull that really dog shit mob, and then you go upstairs and you pull everything again, and then you have to fight that dog shit mob, but this time with some other stuff, so it's a little better. And then you fight like a boss that's pretty bad, a boss that's pretty good, and then a bunch of big pulls into 2 pretty decent bosses. I don't know. I enjoy Throne of the Tides every time I go in it, and I've never done it on the key levels where everything starts to one shot you though. I've done it in like 28.
Well, also depends on what you're playing with. Like if you're playing with a non VDH or prop paladin, it fucking sucks bad.
What is the take from people that this place is F? And usually a lot of the things in chat,
It's
like those
painful.
were the people in chat that were like voting like Shadow Moon B and A and stuff, which I would
because it's the polar opposite of Shadow Moon, right? Like in Shadow Moon or like whatever, it's like, okay, well, there's nothing hard in this dungeon. In Throne of Tides, literally every single pack is like, we can wipe on this pack and complete the key.
it's the pug
Like
players.
part of the reason,
My
the reason why the Ravagers feel like they take so long is because literally every single pull is so dangerous and so scary, and everyone's slamming all their cooldowns. That once you finally get to those guys, you're just like, finally, like I don't, it's like a break pull, and it just.
But there's
takes
just so
forever.
many. There's so much damage. There are so many casters. It's like it's so hard for pugs to deal with it.
What's hard on this key is someone said the last boss, but the last boss is pissed. That guy
Pretty much
doesn't do
everything. I mean, people also fucking suck at clearing the stuff on the floor.
I've never wiped that ever. I've only done pugs in that place.
Really, dude. I've wiped that so many times. People
Really?
never clear.
Maybe it's you, dude. Maybe you're not clearing. Little dorky boomkin.
Nah, it never targets me.
That's good. Well, damn, this is
it's-
polarizing. Where does it?
One thing
Yeah,
I will
this
say about
one's a
this
hard
dungeon
one.
is I feel like there's a trend of most dungeons that got used from previous seasons had a tendency to be worse than I remembered them for some reason or another. Throne was a dungeon that everyone, I think, was dreading based on their experience with it in Time Walking. And it actually, I think, ended up being a pretty good dungeon. Like, the tuning was definitely fucked. Mechanically, I think the dungeon's... And it's a standout dungeon, in my opinion, where I was expecting really bad things from it, and it ended up at least being tolerable.
So, I think when I saw Vortex Pinnacle, I was like, okay, bringing things back from Kata, bad cook. Don't do that. That doesn't work. Shit's just a little too old, and there's too much you have to change, and it doesn't work. And Throne of Tides changed my mind. I think Throne of Tides kind of showed that they could probably bring back pretty much anything if they spent enough time on it. I think this dungeon's pretty good. Oh, another thing,
Yeah, it's pretty solid.
the like last hallway with affixes is like kind of a problem. Sanguine bolstering, that side just feels like those. But then like that's also just like affixes. Those affixes are just bad. So I don't know.
I'm gonna say C. I think you guys can maybe disagree. I think the pacing is good. I think there's a lot of mechanics that are like different and challenging. I think the tuning is a little bit high, and I think there is some stuff like the one-shotty stuff and like things that feel abusive if you don't have the right comp that don't necessarily exist in a lot of the other dungeons this season.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think high C would be
Yeah.
where I'd put it.
Oh,
And I agree that this kind of to me, this is my new take on like bringing back old dungeons, is that it just kind of doesn't matter whether the dungeon was good or bad the first time. If it's like more than 6 years old, what matters is what they do with it when they're bringing it back, and that you just don't know anything about it.
Yeah, it's like a 50-50. Like half the dungeons
Yeah.
we talked about today are dungeons they made better when they brought them back, and
Yeah.
there's just as many that they made worse for some reason. So, okay, we have one more dungeon left before we talk about the seasons. Everbloom. Man, again, DPS brain. If I zone into Everbloom, I'm a happy man. It has some bad affix interactions, but damage amp on the first boss.
Oh, yeah, Everbloom Sesh.
I'm gonna get hated by the chat, but I think Everbloom's a banger. I think this is up there with Waycrest. I think there's lots
I
of
think a
good
lot of
pulls.
people
I think all the boss fights
okay.
are different and interesting. Some of them get a little abusive, but I also think that can kind of be like a high key thing. Like the Berserkers, like they'll just one tick you in a high key, but they don't do that in like 25s or whatever. Same with like, I do think it's a little tough if you're in an uncoordinated group because of how many kicks are required in certain parts, like the second boss. But I think with a coordinated group, it's a very, very
Yeah,
fun dungeon.
second boss kicks is extremely oppressive to pugs for sure. Like it's crazy how much extra damage you take.
I also think routing in this dungeon is as important as any dungeon. Once you learn the packs to avoid and how to like route through this place, I think it makes a lot of pulls that felt really shitty at first feel a lot better. But I think this dungeon is one of the most dependent on the group that you have. Like if your group is lacking kicks or they don't know what to kick, it can feel and is, I mean, not just feel, it is like impossible to heal some of this shit if your group's not getting stops. But if they are, it's a challenging, like second boss is a fun healing boss if you're not just being overwhelmed with casts. Third boss it's a challenging boss to heal. I think it was annoying at the start of the season when you were still kind of learning how the mechanics worked, but it feels fairer now to me than it did. And last boss is another boss where like there's a heavy healing check as the key gets higher. Although that boss may be venturing into the same thing, like it runs afoul of the no fucking ads with scaling health rule, and it starts to get long as shit on high tyrannical keys.
Do you guys have any ideas on why?
Yeah, this key's very hit or miss. I enjoy doing a lot of the trash. Anytime anyone tunes into my stream, I'm literally in this dungeon because I like just pulling a lot of mobs and killing them all. And Yips fucking hates this dungeon, but he does it with us every time because everyone always wants to do this dungeon.
Do you have any idea why Dorki Blizzard would not make the flowers in this dungeon not have affixes? It just seems like something they would do in 2 seconds.
It feels like they probably think it's too easy if there's no, because like if they don't have on-def affixes, then what really does? It's just like a couple of big mobs, right? It's just probably like 3-4 mobs in each pull. And so they probably think like, if it becomes like too much of a non-affix.
Yeah,
but I mean,
there is a lot of them.
Right?
There's a lot of flowers.
There's a lot of flowers, but there are not a lot of big mobs.
It's weird. Yeah, there are too many of the flower. Like, it's just that like when you look at a pull by pull basis, you're like those flowers should not make those affixes happen. But then when you look at it as a whole dungeon, you're like, well, if we made the flowers not do it, then we'd have to like. There's just no mobs in here that would. Yeah, I kind of see that.
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
just too many of
like
one
2
type
or 3
of mob.
big mobs. But I mean, I don't think that's a thing. Like, I don't think that's a problem, right? Like, we should just have the affixes be easy. Like, why the fuck not? I think it's fine if there are only a couple mobs that bolster or drop sanguine or bursting.
What do you guys think? Every B? Mine's way up there.
I have it way up there too, but
I would probably put it
understand
B tier.
Put it lower. Where do you have it, Max?
Me?
I think A.
Mine's A for sure, but I even like this. I love this dungeon in WoD, and I never understood why people disliked it so much. I thought it was always really fun. But I would put it in A for sure. But what do you think, Dratnos?
I think A as well. Yeah, I think the pug situation in here is sometimes like there are certainly some rough parts in a pug where you're just like, and this is the dungeon where in like a weekly 20 I've been checkmated by one of the later bosses the most, especially if your healer is a little bit suspicious. Then the last 2 bosses can both just be, they can feel like unkillable at a lower key level than other dungeons. But I don't know. I still think this is overall a great dungeon, and in the context of a coordinated group, I think it is just a banger.
It'd be really interesting that I wish I would have done. I wish I would have had my chat vote on all of these beforehand and not have you all know what they voted on, and then compared like the chat POV versus ours. Cool. I can tell you it'd be very different. Shadow Moon Battlegrounds would have been way higher. I can name like 4 of these that are in A and B tier that would be at the very bottom. Like just totally different opinions.
Yeah, I mean, to them, it's about puggability and how easy it is. Like, is it a chore or not?
Yeah, definitely. That seems like a theme.
That's how a lot of people see it. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest difference between our opinion and theirs is our opinion. Well, I just mean like in general, right? Our opinion, it's going to be influenced by how it is on high keys and are things abusive. If their opinion is going to be more influenced by how doable is this dungeon without communication. Like if we're just winging it with 5 people rather than a group.
Yeah, so, like on average, like there are people in chat who also do super high keys. There are people in chat who probably pug lower keys, right? But the average, it seems, is right around the like, I maybe dabble in some 20s, but I mainly do this for gear, and I don't. And like your opinion on a dungeon on 20 to 25 could be totally different on a 29 because it's just impossible. Like right. you mentioned Throne of the Tides, right? Throne of the Tides is like, do you know how many people don't even know how the like lightning damage mechanic works on the first boss? Because like on a 15 to like legit all the way up to a 25, you can just randomly be spread out and it just won't kill you. So it doesn't matter. But like on a higher key, it's just like, it just becomes super unfun. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, or like Fall too. Like you don't really have that problem of the last boss being 10 minutes long until you're doing an actual high key.
Okay, so I don't know if we're gonna get into.
Yeah, hold on real quick. I
You have
have
to
raid. I
leave.
gotta bounce.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you so much for having me.
Yeah,
Good luck,
see you,
guys.
man.
Take it easy.
Good luck.
Bye.
Alright,
Good
good
luck,
luck on your
friend.
raid.
Yeah, good luck.
You're finally gonna kill it, Shirley.
Yeah, I kind of
Surely.
want to watch party it, see how it see what.
Well, no,
Yeah.
we have Gromnak
Yeah.
commentating and Max
I
commentating.
mean,
No, dude,
you
I'm
guys
gonna
are, like,
commentate-
the NA guild right
I'm gonna
now.
commentate on the Gromnak POV. That sounds fucking legendary.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
React to the react.
For the record, if anyone wants to commentate, you're welcome to use my stream. Okay, I'm leaving. Bye.
Okay, bye.
okay. Season 1 versus Season 2 versus Season 3. I guess we can just kind of start with, like, how do you guys feel? And I guess we should... That's going to be kind of weird. Like Season 2, you have to count... The God Comp has to matter, but, like, the time before God Comp was also, like, fucking awesome. So it's like that... You have to, like, find the difference between that. And then Season 1, the dungeons got a lot better later on. I guess that's probably true in, like, most seasons, I guess. But... And Season 3 hasn't been out for as long as it took for some of those seasons to get good. So, like, it's kind of early, but I guess we'll give it our best shot. What do you guys think about just Season 1 Mythic Plus overall? Also, the last time we had a seasonal affix, which was a super dookie
Beans
one.
affix though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this season compared to average seasons was quite bad in terms of the dungeons and the seasonal, but the class balance was so good. Like, you could play anything, and they took the good stuff and nerfed it a little. They took the bad stuff and buffed it a little. By the end of the season, you could just do actually anything, and that was sick. So that to me is like a huge saving grace for Season 1. I think I'd bring it all the way up to like B just off of class balance.
Okay. I think I would agree with most of that. Thundering was definitely really bad though. Like, they just went about that in just the worst. We probably don't have to do a full Thundering breakdown, but like everything they wanted to do with Thundering, I think they just did it really poorly. They could have made it less punishing. They could have changed the way you actually like achieve the damage buff. They could also make the buff actually do something. Like the seasonal affix, for the first time ever, they buffed against it. So like the keys were 5%, had 5% more health or something, right? And like I think you did this. You averaged out the damage that people gained during their Thundering buff window, and it actually equaled out to not even be as much as they were nerfing you by for
It was like
existing.
2% over the course of a dungeon on
Yeah.
average.
So it's like, why for the first time ever? Like, do you think we gained a lot of damage from encrypted? Fuck yeah. Why did you not nerf us there? Like, why nerf us? It makes no sense. So super weird. But yeah, that and then. But a lot of the dungeons were rated highly. There was 5 of the 8 dungeons in A or B tier. That's way better than every other season dungeon-wise, right? So
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
Season 1 had the best dungeons, but best dungeons, really good class tuning. Seasonal was complete trash, which absolutely ruined it. And dungeons were maybe a little bit too overtuned, especially at the beginning.
okay. So you guys thinking
That's
B?
how I see it.
Thinking B
I
for
think
A?
B,
Like, it would be
yeah.
like with no Thundering, it would have been like A or S tier, right? It would have been a fucking
I think
banger.
S if there was just no seasonal, yeah.
Damn, Thundering fucking tanked that season. Okay. All right, Season
It
2.
was garbage.
You mentioned tuning. I think the best tuning this game has ever had was 10.1 before 10.1.5 came out. I don't think there's ever been more balance across healers, tanks, and DPS than there was before AUG existed. And then the craziest duality of that into it going to the exact opposite in being the worst meta this game's ever seen. And both of them matter. I think the 10.1.5 was for most of the patch, I believe. So like most of the patch was with AUGs. Probably takes a little bit of precedent, but no seasonal. First time a seasonal has not been in years, which is bad and good, right? Like seasonals can absolutely tank a season, and they can also make it fucking incredible. I don't know. What do you guys think, Season 2?
I just have trouble rewarding God Comp. Like, I think at best, Season 2 would be like C tier for me. It had, well, first off, Season 2 had multiple dungeons I really didn't like. And on the whole, I would rather a season have a bunch of okay dungeons than a bunch of good dungeons and a bunch of bad dungeons that like average out to. I'd rather have a bunch of mid dungeons than
Any
polar
bad?
opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah. 1 or 2 bad dungeons in a dungeon set, I feel like can
Especially
really
when there's
fuck
only
vibe up.
8. When there's only 8
Yeah.
dungeons, it matters so much more too. Yeah.
So having like Vortex in there, having like Neltharis, dungeons like that I'm just like, oh, dude, I do not want to go into that fucking dungeon. And then God Comp being as ridiculous as it was, it just was not. I don't know. I don't look back on the season fondly.
Well, even you guys are mentioning, and I haven't heard from the other two yet, but are mentioning how God comp was like such a bad thing. But you have to keep in mind that us compared to other people, we all have the ability to run God comp anytime we want, and we did. And
yeah, I was gonna say, like, for me personally, I actually quite enjoyed season 2 just because like I played TGP and TGP was a banger. But if I was not playing TGP and if I was like, you know, not trying to farm reroll, it would be quite miserable.
But like a lot of people listening to this, if you were unable to play because of God comp, just imagine how much worse this season would have been for you. My only point is that from our position, we had full access to God comp whenever we wanted, and there's a bunch of people who just didn't play those 5 specs, and this season basically didn't exist for them. It would be a turbo F tier, right? So I don't know. I didn't play it. I played I leveled my druid, and I did a bunch of 29s and 30s, and then I stopped. I played this season for like a week after the MDI was over, or TGP. I have very little opinion.
Yeah, I did this season all after the God comp. I pushed keys, and man, like it was bad for me. But your point is good because like it would have been so much worse if I didn't have access to the God comp, right? Like if I didn't have people who were willing to reroll, and if I wasn't willing to reroll, and we were just like trying to do it with other specs. Like there were like only a few groups in the world that got even into title range without playing God comp. It was brutal.
I mean, this is also kind of a weird take, and people are definitely going to get mad at this. If you had access to God comp and you didn't care about playing one of those classes, it was very fun to play because that comp had a solution for like any problem you would run into, and it was fun figuring that out.
It did feel overpowered, yeah, because like 1 week you were doing 25s, and then the next week Augmentation Evoker came out, and Mage got buffed, and Paladin got buffed, and you were able to do 28s, and they were easier than the 25s were last week, and that was.
However, I will say, everything came out overtuned as shit, class balance wise, and you spent the entire rest of the season getting nerfed every fucking week.
That's true, and it was still the best. It was still the best comp. They nerfed all the specs in God comp 3 or 4 times, and it was still the best comp, but it did feel worse because every week you were getting weaker.
And then they buffed they made the dungeons easier.
They made the dungeons easier because they were like, oh, we don't want to. We don't want to. Which
weird.
I think that was a good
Well, I mean,
decision.
that was the right move.
It was the right move, but it was really bad that they were put in a position where
the fact that we ever got to that point is
exactly
so weird.
I mean, the bigger thing is that they just didn't do anything for like the first 2-3 months of the patch, which was the real problem.
Yeah.
I don't understand why it always takes them so long to do adjustments.
I swear they wait till the WoW esports seasons. They'll correct anything.
They kind of do. Well, yeah.
It's like a glaring problem with a dungeon. If there's like something that's super broken, they'll fix it early on. But then I feel like they're just like, fuck it. We'll just wait until WoW esports season starts.
TGP figures it out.
Because they'll have a shitload of feedback, and we'll just collect all that feedback, like at that point in time, and then we'll set someone to like fixing it during that season, and then hopefully by the time WoW esports is done, we'll have taken care of most of it.
Yeah, the worst part is like it's the same feedback that we've been giving them.
What do you guys? I mean, I don't even know how you rate this because I feel like you need to have a rating. It's just F if you weren't a God comp player, and it's inarguable. And if you played God comp, it's somewhere else. But like, if you put it in the middle of that, that would also be wrong for both people. So like, I don't fucking know. I guess just like C or something.
I'd probably put season 2 as D tier.
What do you guys think?
What would be considered the worst season of M+?
Worst season of Mythic Plus? Well, it's probably going to be affix related.
I mean, 100% the worst season of Mythic.
PFA season 3.
I'm muted. I'm muted right now, but basically, the worst Mythic Plus season is reserved for, and this is weird because like you want them to do seasonals, but it's the ones where they missed on the seasonals. I mean, it just absolutely fucking tanked Mythic Plus. It was so
season
bad.
1 BFA was Gahoon.
Yeah, the little Gahoonies.
Like,
yeah, that was bad.
I don't think any seasonal's ever been worse than that shit.
Beguiling might have been worse than Infested.
I think you guys are just really not remembering like how bad Gahoon was. If you fucked that, you could literally grief your key.
You could brick the whole key in one pull.
If you
Beguiling had
the wrong
12 weeks on the calendar, and you could literally only push on 2 of them.
But the point is, any dungeon with the Gahoon shit, if you accidentally let it go into the wrong 2 mobs, they would heal each other.
And then you would
forever,
wipe. Yeah.
And you couldn't, like, if you wiped, it wouldn't go away. Like, those mobs are just infinitely Gahooned. And if it was a pack that you had to do, you're done. You have to walk out of the key.
Yeah, Gahoonies were really bad. Like, really, really bad. All right. Season 2 is a D tier season. I guess. Season 3. We're in the middle of it.
Yep, we're in the middle of it. I think I feel like
it's got to be better than
not
season...
bad. Yeah.
Is it better
I'm liking
than
season 3. I'm liking season 3 so far.
How could season
the
3
dungeons are
be
pretty
worse
good.
than season 1 when thundering doesn't exist? I don't know. Like, how could you lose to thundering?
Well, like I said, I don't feel like there's many dungeons, which is interesting to me. Season 3, when they announced the dungeon slate, I was like, Jesus, this sounds... I ended up not hating, I don't think, any dungeon from season 3, except for maybe the Dawns, and a lot of that was just tuning. I've warmed up to them as they've gotten less oppressive in terms of the tuning. But other than that, there's really not any dungeon that I despise going into. I don't think it has really any banger dungeons this season. But like I said, I am much more afraid of having really shitty dungeons than I'm excited about having really good dungeons. So I think that works in season 3's favor. I think the tuning or the class balance this tier is starting to creep up on season 1 in terms of being able to play a bunch of different shit.
Oh, yeah.
The tank meta could probably be a little more diverse, but you're seeing, like when I look on my friends list at what people are playing on MDI, like the classes they're trying out, I've seen people on like every fucking class. People are trying out. Like I'm seeing fucking DPS warriors, I'm seeing hunters in there, I'm seeing even some like DPS shamans getting played.
Yeah, that's...
there's
yeah,
there's very few specs that are just untouched right now in MDI testing.
Yeah, that's just how good the damage balance in this game is. Objectively insane. It's super good. It's just that those classes in that low of a key level can live, and a lot of them simply can't live a boss shouting your entire HP every 15 seconds in a 32, you know? So, like, it's just removing the defensive aspect, really, of high keys, and that's why it's so balanced.
Yeah, I mean, it's still pretty balanced in high keys compared to an average season, I'd say. And the recent buffs have been like this is, I think, one of the most effective set of buffs for bringing some specs into the metagame that weren't already, like Rep Pally, Shadow Priest.
Unholy Decay.
Yeah, Unholy Decay. Well, Unholy Decay. It only got a small buff, but yeah, it was already not bad.
Yeah.
A little bit legendary
Windwalker
dependent on some of the
Windwalker
specs,
is
but...
also, no one is playing Windwalker, but Windwalker
Yeah.
fucking cranks. Yeah, there's...
Windwalker bangs.
And there's 2 good tanks and 3 good healers, which again, like that sounds bad, but it's actually
It's good historically.
not historically.
Most
yeah, like, that's pretty
seasons
good.
for tank, like most Mythic Plus seasons, there is a extremely dominant tank.
Yeah.
Well, it's more honestly, it's more like 2 insanely good tanks, and then like
Yeah, the
3
next
good
best options
tanks,
aren't
and
bad.
then-
Like you can do a 30
Yeah.
on a lot of stuff.
right. Like I think damage balance right now is amazing. The rest, like utility and defensiveness, not so amazing.
And as long as you have infinitely scaling game modes, there will never be like really sick balance because of that.
Well, the thing is, you could not make defensive. It's just that you have to, and this is the thing I really wish they would do going into next expansion. I think that mob health needs to scale faster than mob damage in keys, and I think it would be better off for Mythic Plus as a whole. You failed keys more often because you simply couldn't go fast enough, not because you're in danger of getting one shot. And it wouldn't be hard to get the tuning on that. Like, I mean, literally, like right now, damage and health move in lockstep. Like they both scale at the same rate. If you just made it so that health is 10% and damage is like 7% per
yeah,
key
no,
level,
you're exactly right.
you would reach that point where you're just like, I can't do enough damage to the mobs. But I think that it feels much better to miss a key because you were like, fuck, we just didn't go fast enough, rather than like, oh, the first boss hit me with a thing and I fucking died.
Yeah, one of the worst feelings in M+, in my opinion at least, when doing a higher key, is you're doing a super high key and you're like, all right, good. We could just take it safe here and do like, you know, the slower or like the easier pull because we have time. Like I don't want that to be the limiting factor. I want it to be like, oh fuck, you know, like we gotta go. We gotta like do this pull that we had planned to like try to save time.
Yeah, I
Like,
love the
more
feeling
often
of
than
like
not, it's
going
like-
for it for the timer, right?
Yeah,
And it's
and
like,
more often than not, it's like, all right, just take it slow here. Just do this
yeah,
one guy. We
like
have
we're
plenty
gonna
of
time
left.
this key by 5 minutes if we don't make a mistake, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There's 2 solutions, and one was an idea you had a while ago, which is that keys stop scaling health and damage at 25, and then the key levels above that are just shorter timers. Solves it. and the other one is what you just said, which is right now you scale health and damage the same, but like you should be fighting. Ideally, you should be fighting, timing the key, and living at a equal difficulty rate. And what it's been for a while is 4 or 5 key levels early, you are just trying to live before you care about the timer at all. And they just haven't scaled properly together in a very long time, and that's just something they need to change if they don't end up capping the infinite scaling. But yeah, so do you guys agree season 3, do you think it's ahead of season 1 in the B category? Or do you think season 3 is A tier?
I would have it, I think, an A tier at this point. I am a big fan of no fucking seasonal affix. I think affixes are in general, affixes are now as watered down as they've ever been, which I think is good. And the dungeon pool doesn't have any huge stinkers in it. So I think class balance is as good as it's been maybe ever in Mythic Plus right now. The dungeon pool doesn't suck. Affixes are as like out of the way as they've ever been. So I would probably have it A tier.
All right.
Okay, I gotta go raid as well.
All right. Maybe we table the what expansion had the best Mythic Plus argument for another time. It's probably a lot more in depth.
Easy BFA, bro. It's not even close.
See, but even then, that's so interesting because like how much of BFA Mythic Plus was propped up by like how sick the end of that expansion was, which has nothing to do. Corruption has nothing to do with Mythic Plus. What if you did, Dragonflight Season 3 with fucking scaling corruption every week? It'd be totally different, right? What if you did BFA Mythic Plus with a rotating dungeon set? Is rotating better than non-rotating? There's a million conversations to have that is a lot more nuanced than which one was the most fun to play at the time, because a lot of it had nothing to do with Mythic Plus itself, right? You could also say, BFA
I think
was
it's
awesome.
A combination of all of it. Well, I mean, aren't we saying the same for these seasons, though? Like, we're taking into account season 2 sucked because of like these factors, class balance. And season 1 sucked because of Thundering.
Bro, class balance in Dragonflight Mythic Plus has been even including the God comp, has been monumentally better than all of BFA.
Oh yeah, it's not even close.
It's not even close, right?
But
and
BFA was just more fun because like the dungeons didn't feel as oppressive. I think that's the largest.
Yeah,
thing.
probably. But then like you have to keep in mind that like while a lot of people when they think of BFA Mythic Plus, they're instantly in their head thinking of season 2 or season 4, and like season 1 and season 3 both existed, which cancels out. I mean, absolutely helps average out how good Awaken and Reaping were with how bad Beguiling and Infest. Like, I think it's a lot more interesting than you'd think, but I do... Like, most people would be like, if you did Mythic Plus and BFA, that was the most fun I've ever had, right? And that matters. But I also think that just so much of that is cherry-picking specific parts of the expansion and also not including things that made Mythic Plus fun that had nothing to do with it.
That's definitely true.
Anyways, we can have that conversation another time, but I think it's an interesting one.